Hey guys, tonight we wander into the twilight edges of 1980s Mexico, where the air carries the tang of desert dust, and shadows don't just fall, they watch. We begin on a quiet night under the Sinaloan stars, where a man walks slowly through rows of plants. Not flowers, not corn, but something far more lucrative. Each leaf shimmers faintly in the moonlight, and the soil is treated with reverence, not just calculation. He stoops to inspect the roots, his hand brushing the stems like they're old friends. No one's watching, but Rafael Caro Quintero doesn't do this for show. The man has built an empire not with guns, but with chlorophyll and chemistry. He's a botanist of the illicit kind, methodical, soft-spoken, and possibly more dangerous than the men who shout orders. You probably won't survive this world, not because of the bullets, but because of how quietly the danger blooms. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know where you're listening from and what time it is. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. The Sierra Madre never sleeps. It just breathes slower when the world's not looking. And somewhere high in that mountain spine, tucked away from highways and headlines, sits the small village of La Noria. In the 1950s, it was the sort of place where you learned more from wind patterns than school books. There were no grand cathedrals, just dirt roads lined with cactus and homes made of adobe that creaked when the wind shifted. Rafael is born here in 1952 into a family of poverty and dust. His father's a laborer. His mother counts coins before dusk. And Rafael, even as a child, he prefers the company of plants to people. There's an old story, possibly apocryphal, that young Rafael once nursed a dying tomato vine back to health, while other boys chased lizards with slingshots. He was already different, curious, careful, and silent in a way that unsettled adults. He didn't just notice what grew, he understood why it grew. The composition of the soil, the way water soaked deeper after sundown, the difference between leaf curl from pests and from overwatering. A child like that? In another life, he might have become a botanist in a university lab, but Sinaloa doesn't reward science. It rewards results. By 12, Rafael is working odd jobs on ranches. He wakes before the roosters. He doesn't complain, and he watches how older men plant, how they waste water, how the heat affects different strains of beans and maize. But beneath the routine work, a secret trade bubbles quietly. Marijuana, not the casual backyard kind, but the kind that brings profit across borders. It's the 1960s, and America's appetite for narcotics is swelling, even if its politicians pretend otherwise. One rancher, a local known only as El Meco, notices Rafael's diligence. He teaches him more than fieldwork: how to hide tracks, how to test potency, how to move product with discretion. Rafael doesn't ask for these lessons, but he absorbs them like soil drinks rain. And somewhere in those early teenage years, a line is crossed, not with a bang, but with a seed. Mainstream history often focuses on the guns, the raids, the headlines. But drug empires don't start with gunfights. They start with irrigation lines, calculated pH levels, and fields so green they look like heaven from the sky. Rafael understands this. By 18, he's no longer an apprentice. He's an asset. Not yet a kingpin, but a man whose work whispers power, and power attracts attention. Word spreads that Rafael's fields yield more per hectare than anyone else's. He doesn't grow just to grow. He tweaks variables, crossbreeds strains, analyzes yields. Older growers mock him at first, call him the plant boy. But after one of them loses half his crop to mold while Rafael's remains pristine, they start asking questions instead of laughing. He doesn't answer them. He just smiles slightly and walks away. That, in time, becomes his signature move. Understated retreat. Many people still think that, had Rafael been born into academia, he might have changed agricultural science in Mexico forever. So what do you think? Does circumstance shape destiny? Or do certain paths find us no matter the terrain? By the early 1970s, Rafael isn't just cultivating cannabis. He's cultivating influence. His fields fund better equipment, cleaner water, and eventually, protection. Not from the law, yet, but from rival growers who envy his success. It's around this time that whispers begin to circulate about a quiet kid from La Noria whose plants are more valuable than gold. He builds trust the way he builds soil health. Patiently, quietly, and with long-term vision. He doesn't drink much, doesn't chase girls in town. He reads old botany manuals with missing covers. He rewrites recipes for fertilizer in his notebook. And somewhere in all this, a shift occurs, not just in output, but in philosophy. Rafael doesn't see himself as a criminal. He sees himself as a provider, a grower. He's feeding a market, sure, but more than that, he's feeding his village, his people, his future. By the time he's in his early 20s, his name appears in conversations usually reserved for older, louder men. Not because he asks to be included, but because his product speaks for itself. And in this line of work, quality is currency. There's a dusty cantina on the outskirts of Los Mochis where deals are whispered over tamales and tecate. One evening, a man named Ernesto Fonseca Carrillo drops Rafael's name in passing. That kid, he mutters, grows like he's part plant himself. Across the table sits another figure, more reserved, sharper dressed, Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo. He says nothing, but his eyes narrow slightly. That's the beginning, not of a partnership yet, but of awareness. And awareness in this world is the first step toward power, or peril. As Rafael walks through his fields one last time that season, a storm brews gently on the horizon. Not a literal one, though the wind does shift, but something larger. Connections are forming, paths are crossing, and somewhere in the shadows, the blueprint of a cartel begins to take shape. Not drawn in ink, but in trust, ambition, and 1,000 green leaves swaying under moonlight. The Sierra mornings are slower than most. The sun doesn't rise. It hesitates, filters through the mist, then nudges the valley awake. In La Noria, where time moves like syrup down a cold plate, Rafael Caro Quintero is already on his feet before the sky turns amber. By the time other villagers rub sleep from their eyes, Rafael has already checked his irrigation lines, cleaned his boots, and planned his day in his head. Not with haste, but with precision. It's not ambition that wakes him early. It's rhythm. He's a man synced to the pulse of the earth. His roots, much like the wild mesquite near the old church, run deep into Sinaloa's dust. Rafael's family never had much, and the village didn't expect much of its children, just survival. But some boys find adventure in cracks and corners, and Rafael, without knowing it, begins to carve something far larger than a life. He's crafting a world, one plant at a time. His father was a man of short sentences and long silences. He didn't believe in luck or complaint. Life, he said, was a slope, always slippery, always downward, and your job was to dig your heels in and stay standing. Rafael listened, but instead of fighting the slope, he began to wonder what might grow along its edge. Why fight gravity when you can plant something in its path? In those early years, he learns more from watching shadows than from sermons. While others sleep through the midday heat, Rafael finds shade beneath thorny trees and sketches diagrams in the dirt. Where should water run? Which leaves curl first in drought? Which roots grow sideways and which go deep? He doesn't just want yield. He wants understanding. There's a moment that sticks in the memory of one neighbor, a moment he tells in the cantina decades later. Rafael, maybe 15, kneels beside a sick cornstalk. Others had yanked theirs and replanted, but Rafael gently brushes the soil away, finds a knot of grubs, and with a surgeon's calm, removes them one by one. "It's not the plant's fault," he says. "It's the guests it didn't ask for." That's the first time someone uses the word different when talking about him. By the late 60s, marijuana cultivation in Sinaloa is no secret. What's secret is who's doing it best. And Rafael is, quietly, methodically. While some growers get greedy, planting dense, sloppy fields that overheat and rot, Rafael spaces his crops with surgical precision. His plants don't just grow, they perform, taller, greener, more potent. And unlike others, he keeps records, not on a typewriter or ledger, in a set of waterproof notebooks buried in a coffee canister, buried, of course, beneath his mother's roses. Mainstream history tends to lump early narcos into one blur of violence and vice, but Rafael defies that. He's polite, reserved, even generous in his own way. He tips well, greets old men in the plaza, helps women carry buckets up hills. The man who will one day top DEA most wanted lists begins as a boy who carries too many books in his satchel. Not because anyone told him to, but because information soothes him more than approval. It's during these formative years that Rafael begins to draw notice, not just for his plants, but for his posture. Always upright, always listening. The kind of teenager who enters a room and rearranges the silence without saying a word. One older grower, suspicious of his talent, tests him, offers him subpar soil, and dares him to make it flourish. 3 months later, Rafael returns with bushels so fragrant they're mistaken for another strain entirely. The man pays him double and never questions him again. Do you remember the night he first walked into the back room of a mechanic's shop outside Culiacan? He didn't speak, didn't gesture, just placed a sample on the table, nodded once, and stepped outside. That night, his name entered a different registry. Not legal, not official, but permanent. Many people still think that Rafael's success in those years had little to do with luck or location. They argue it was his restraint, the way he avoided overplanting, overspeaking, overreaching, that separated him from the pack. So what do you think? Is discipline more powerful than risk in the long game? By 1972, whispers of his abilities reach beyond Sinaloa, not just through narco circles, but through the softer networks, drivers, ranchers, cousins of mayors, men who aren't criminals, not exactly, but who know how the world turns. They hear of a young man who grows cannabis like it's couture. Elegant, potent, predictable. He doesn't advertise, doesn't make threats. But his fields are becoming legendary. There's a dusty road that curves along the edge of the village, barely wide enough for 2 donkeys. Rafael walks it often, alone, whistling, always with dirt under his fingernails. One day, a black Chevrolet Impala crawls up behind him. Inside sit 2 men. Not armed, but not unarmed either. They invite him in. He doesn't ask who they are, just brushes the dirt from his pants, slides into the back seat and says, "Don't take the main road, it's washing out." That ride marks the beginning of something else, a network, a future, maybe a sentence. The men introduce him to someone farther up the chain, a connection tied to Guadalajara, a city pulsing with hidden ambition and government smiles. And through that connection, Rafael meets more polished men in suits, men who talk less about crops and more about scale, efficiency, export potential, but he never forgets his roots. While others clamor for trucks, planes, and proxies, Rafael continues walking the fields himself, even after dark, even in rain. He believes you don't delegate what you don't understand. That's what makes him dangerous, not just to the law, but to the very idea of failure. A photograph surfaces in the archives of a long-forgotten journalist. It shows Rafael in the 1970s, sitting barefoot on the edge of a canal, notebook in lap, shirt unbuttoned to the ribs, a cigarette forgotten in his left hand. He looks like a student on break, but the fields behind him, worth millions. That's the paradox. He never looks like the villain. He looks like the kid who could have been anything. And maybe that's exactly what makes him terrifying. The desert doesn't forgive poor planning. It scorches the careless and rewards those who listen, not just to the wind, but to the invisible rhythms underneath the soil. By the mid-1970s, Rafael Caro Quintero isn't just listening, he's orchestrating. What began as survival is now an empire in seed form, and instead of ambition driving him, it's design, precision, the thrill of control. Rancho Buffalo, the famed plantation he'll later command, isn't even on the horizon yet, but the seeds are already being scattered, metaphorically and literally. Rafael is learning to blend science with secrecy. Each grow site is a blueprint of his own making, with trenches angled for optimal drainage and crops shaded at calculated times of day. He's still in his 20s, and already, older smugglers are quietly adapting his methods. Of course, they never admit it. They just show up one season with straighter rows, better germination, and coy grins. In a profession saturated with risk, Rafael's cultivation techniques reduce margin for error like a surgeon's steady hand. He doesn't throw money at problems. He designs around them. Need to water discreetly? Dig channels that mimic old flood routes? Need to move product at night? Plant along the old mule trails locals already use? Need to keep nosy ranchers away? Gift their mothers canisters of flour and soap every Christmas. He calls it insurance, but not the kind you'd find on a policy. Many people still think that the reason Rafael's operations thrived so early wasn't just because he was smart, but because he was invisible. So what do you think? Is quiet brilliance more dangerous than loud charisma? By 1975, Rafael has more than fields. He has a crew. Small at first, mostly cousins, old schoolmates, and a few former field workers who proved loyal. They don't call themselves anything. They don't even consider it a cartel yet. But they move with coordinated silence, like ants protecting a queen, each knowing their route, their rhythm, their reward. That's when Ernesto Fonseca Carrillo circles back into Rafael's life, not as a casual contact, but as a partner with big ideas and older connections. Ernesto is no farmer. He's sharp in a different way, clever, opportunistic, more willing to push than plan. But he sees something in Rafael, not just potential, control. The kind of control you need to scale an operation without inviting chaos. The two men, one methodical, one mercurial, form a strange but potent alliance. And then comes the third name, the name that will matter more than the rest, Miguel Ángel Felix Gallardo. Miguel isn't a grower. He's a former federal police officer turned strategist, fluent in politics, fluent in profit. He sees the game not as farmland, but as territory, diplomacy, and influence. He's the one who begins stitching together the various regional growers and traffickers into something coherent. And Rafael, he becomes the man who can grow the product that justifies that coherence. They meet at a safe house just outside Guadalajara. The three of them sit around a bare table with nothing but a map, a calculator, and a bottle of mezcal. Miguel does most of the talking. Ernesto interrupts. Rafael listens. When he finally speaks, it's not about profits or patrol routes. It's about soil quality and topographic data from Chihuahua. The others blink, unsure whether he's joking. He isn't. That night, a new blueprint is born, not just of a cartel, but of a business model. Grow in the north, consolidate in the west, export through the sea. And for the first time, Rafael's world expands beyond what he can walk. Still, he doesn't abandon the land. That's important. While Miguel and Ernesto court politicians and arrange logistics, Rafael returns to his roots. Literally. He begins planning what will become one of the largest marijuana plantations in recorded history. Rancho Buffalo, but more on that later. In the meantime, his work deepens in both scale and subtlety. He begins experimenting with hybrid strains, not just for potency, but for survival. Plants that can endure wind, grow faster in shade, and require less water. These aren't just crops, they're weapons. Not in the traditional sense, but in the war of profits, power, and supply chains. There's a story, possibly embellished, possibly not, that Rafael once rejected an entire harvest because it lacked consistency in scent. He ordered the crew to burn the whole thing, not out of vanity, out of principle. A subpar product could weaken his leverage, and he never negotiates with weakness. Mainstream historical fact confirms that by 1977, Rafael Caro Quintero is responsible for coordinating thousands of kilos of marijuana bound for the United States. DEA reports start to notice his name. Not often, not loudly, but just enough. Quintero, possible associate, cultivator, unknown threat level. That's how it starts. Do you remember the story of the old rancher who tried to undercut Rafael's pricing by flooding the market with fast-grown product? That rancher's fields mysteriously caught fire. No proof. No witnesses. Just ash and silence. Rafael never claimed responsibility. In fact, he sent the man's daughter a new school bag the next week. It's unclear whether that was a threat or an apology. He keeps his headquarters simple. A house with clean lines, a garden, and no ostentation. When he hosts meetings, he offers tea. When tensions rise, he steps outside and returns with a smile. People trust him, not because they should, but because it's easier than not trusting him. And Rafael never gives more information than required. Many wonder if he ever enjoyed the power, or if he simply enjoyed the perfection. He was rarely seen with the ostentatious chains or fur-lined coats other narcos favored. His luxury came in quieter forms: rare orchids, imported fertilizer, notebooks written in ink so precise it looked typed. A DEA informant years later described Rafael as the only trafficker who made me want to apologize for interrupting his day. That's the kind of man we're dealing with. By the end of the decade, his fields stretch beyond maps, guarded by silence and geometry. He's no longer just a farmer. He's the architect of an empire whose foundation is chlorophyll, calculation, and just enough myth to keep people guessing. The seeds he planted in Lenoria, they've grown into something towering. And like the finest trees, they cast long shadows. The meeting place is nondescript. A single-story safe house on the outskirts of Guadalajara, the windows half covered by faded curtains, the driveway packed with dust instead of grass. But inside, something much larger than the four walls is beginning to take shape. This is where Rafael Caro Quintero, Ernesto Fonseca Carrillo, and Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo first begin to speak as equals. 3 men, 3 temperaments, 3 visions, and yet, somehow, a single direction. No one calls it a cartel yet, not officially. It's more of a handshake, a gentleman's agreement built on whispered promises, blurred borders, and the belief that if they coordinate their operations, no one can touch them. And in the middle of it all stands Rafael, not with swagger, but with certainty. He doesn't argue or flatter. He simply presents results. His plants thrive in places others abandon. His yields are higher, his profits cleaner. And when Gallardo asks how he manages pests, Rafael answers with words like infestation cycles and phosphorus ratios. The others are impressed and just a little unnerved. It's in these years, between 1977 and 1980, that the Guadalajara cartel takes shape. Not with gang tattoos or street battles, but with clipped meetings in quiet restaurants and long drives through the countryside. The old system, regional capos operating in isolation, is giving way to something new, a federation. Miguel provides the strategy, Fonseca brings muscle and legacy, and Rafael ensures that the product is not only steady, but superior. Rancho Buffalo becomes the crown jewel of this new alliance. Rafael finds a stretch of land in the Chihuahua Desert. Remote, hard to reach, and blessed with soil he deems moderately acceptable. That's high praise coming from him. With the help of engineers, laborers, and a tight circle of trusted lieutenants, he transforms it into something almost mythical, a plantation so vast that satellite photos later mistake it for a government operation. Many people still think that the success of Rancho Buffalo came down to bribery, but that's only half the story. So what do you think? Is money the true fertilizer of empires? Or is obsession the richer soil? The plantation is run like a science lab. Workers arrive before sunrise, are divided into units, and operate on strict schedules. Some tend the seedlings, others handle irrigation. Rafael personally oversees the hybridization process, crossbreeding strains, testing potency, even labeling specimens with Greek letters and short codes. His notebooks are full of diagrams, not threats. He wears jeans and boots, not gold chains. He doesn't yell. He simply pauses, blinks, and says, "Start over." That, more than any threat, sends shivers through the staff. One DEA agent, reviewing aerial photos of Rancho Buffalo, described it as impossibly organized. Straight lines, consistent growth patterns, no signs of overplanting. Even the access roads are laid out with military logic. What he couldn't see from above was the irrigation system, underground, gravity-fed, and completely custom-built. Rafael didn't trust store-bought solutions. And the security? Quiet, but absolute. Not just armed guards, but sensors, false road markers, and even fake scarecrows embedded with listening devices. One legend claims that Rafael could track rainfall within 2-mile increments and adjusted watering schedules accordingly. Another says he once had a laborer dismissed simply for whistling too close to a sensitive section of test plants. There's an undeniable tension in those years. Success is never quiet for long. While Rafael obsesses over yield percentages and pest control, outside forces begin to circle. Local politicians want a slice. Federal agents begin noticing. And traffickers in Colombia, yes, them, start asking how a botanist in Mexico can supply such volumes with so few hiccups. Do you remember the first party at La Langosta? The upscale restaurant Rafael eventually buys? That opening night, the crowd was an odd mix of ranchers, lawmakers, and mid-level traffickers. Rafael barely spoke. He spent more time observing the seafood prep than schmoozing. But that night set the tone. This was no street operation. This was upscale crime. Quiet, curated, and calculated. Still, Rafael never loses sight of the fields. While others begin enjoying the spotlight, he stays rooted, pun intended. His hands remain calloused. His shirts are still rolled at the sleeves. He starts bringing young agronomy students up to Rancho Buffalo under the guise of consulting, though no one ever sees them leave with diplomas. They learn a different kind of science there. The money starts piling in faster than anyone can count. Millions in cash. Enough to buy properties across Sinaloa, Jalisco, and even Baja. Yet Rafael continues living in modest homes, clean, minimalist, with small gardens he tends himself. He doesn't collect sports cars. He collects orchids. There's one in particular, a pale yellow variety he calls Flor del Norte, that he nurtures for years. He once tells an associate, "This flower is like the business. It needs balance or it folds in on itself. Mainstream history often forgets these details. The flowers, the notebooks, the measured cadence in Raphael's speech. Because it's easier to remember blood than structure." But the foundation of what becomes one of Mexico's most powerful drug syndicates was laid not with weapons, but with diagrams, soil samples, and quiet discipline. There's tension growing within the trio, too. Gallardo wants broader expansion. Fonseca prefers tighter control. Rafael, he just wants consistency. At one meeting, when tempers flare, he simply taps his notebook and says, "You can argue politics. I'll argue potency," and walks out. He begins withdrawing slightly from public meetings, choosing instead to relay messages through lieutenants or to host gatherings on the ranch, where he controls the schedule, the food, the exit routes. He's never confrontational. He just makes sure you understand that every path out of the room leads through him. And yet, there are moments when Rafael shows signs of something else. Weariness, maybe, or awareness that things are growing too fast. One evening, he's seen standing alone in a field under a thundercloud, just watching the sky. A worker asks if he's waiting for rain. "No," he says, "I'm waiting for something to end." But nothing ends, not yet. For now, the plants keep growing, the shipments keep moving, and the cartel keeps smiling, at least outwardly, in the dry heart of Chihuahua, under a sun that doesn't just shine but interrogates. Rancho Buffalo stretches across the desert like a secret nobody can quite keep. By the early 1980s, the operation is no longer just impressive, it's unthinkable. Hundreds of acres, thousands of workers, and a system so ruthlessly efficient, it puts commercial farms to shame. But this isn't agriculture in the legal sense. This is precision narcobotany. And Rafael Caro Quintero stands at its center, not with a throne, but with a clipboard. He walks the fields daily, weaving between rows of identical plants that somehow each carry a slightly different story. Some are experimental hybrids. Others are tried and true strains for bulk exports. All are treated with respect. Rafael doesn't see a crop. He sees a formula, and Rancho Buffalo is his laboratory. To the outside world, The plantation is practically invisible. Satellite surveillance in those years is still rudimentary. Local authorities are either bribed, complicit, or entirely unaware. Workers live in barracks, fed and clothed, many of them believing they are part of a government-endorsed research program. It's easier that way. Safer. He divides the laborers into teams: watering, weeding, trimming, sorting. Every team has a foreman. Every foreman reports to a field manager. Every field manager knows that if Rafael appears unexpectedly, they'd better know their numbers. He never shouts, just listens, then says, "Tell me again about Section 7, and waits. The scale is staggering. Estimates vary, but mainstream historical sources place production in the range of thousands of tons of high-grade marijuana per year. Each shipment destined for the U.S. is packaged, weighed, and routed with chilling accuracy. Trucks cross borders disguised as poultry delivery vans. Planes fly low across the desert, following terrain lines known only to Rafael's trusted pilots. And when necessary, shipments go by sea, loaded at night, wrapped in tarpaulin, marked with color-coded tape. At the height of its operation, Rancho Buffalo becomes a nexus of agricultural genius and criminal enterprise. But it isn't just the drugs that impress. It's the infrastructure. There are greenhouses for testing humidity resistance, makeshift labs for analyzing resin content, even a seed bank, cataloged by Rafael himself, where he stores samples of each strain with handwritten notes on ideal planting conditions. Many people still think that what doomed Rancho Buffalo wasn't law enforcement, but hubris, that Rafael made it too perfect, too big, too visible. So what do you think? Is perfection always a step too close to discovery? Back in Guadalajara, the cartel is thriving. Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo is working diplomatic angles, cozying up to corrupt officials, and stitching together transport routes across Mexico. Ernesto Fonseca Carrillo is handling logistics and ensuring loyalty with a mixture of charm and steel. Rafael? He stays on the ranch. Happy, it seems, among his plants and charts, more interested in root depth than power struggles. There's an irony here. The quiet one, the one who doesn't boast, doesn't drink publicly, doesn't throw lavish parties, is the one generating the cartel's most consistent income. Cocaine may be flashier, but marijuana is steady, dependable, and incredibly profitable at this scale. And Rafael understands it like a second language. Still, whispers begin to swirl about the scale, about the plantation, about a DEA agent in Mexico who's starting to put pieces together. Do you remember the first time someone brought up Enrique, Kiki Camarena's name in cartel conversation? It was casual, a footnote in a meeting. "There's this American asking questions," someone said. Very polite, very persistent. And Rafael, he just nodded. "Polite is fine," he said. "Polite is predictable." But even the most predictable patterns have breaking points. Meanwhile, Rafael's public persona remains almost absurdly clean. He donates to local churches, funds community projects in Sinaloa, sends money to widows of men he once worked beside. In court later, several villagers testify that he was always good to the town. A dentist recalls him paying for children's braces. A teacher remembers him delivering books to a remote school, personally in a truck, dressed in denim, smiling, yet he knows the eyes are turning. DEA surveillance increases. Rumors spread that satellite images are being studied. Rafael responds, not with panic, but with optimization. He begins rotating plots more frequently, moving labor teams, installing camouflage netting over certain sections. To anyone else, It would seem excessive. To Rafael, it's necessary. One night, during a routine walk through the eastern quadrant of the ranch, he pauses beside a particular strain, one he's been cultivating for months. He notices the leaf edges curling prematurely, kneels, touches the soil, a minor imbalance, likely calcium-related. He calls for a field manager and whispers, "Fix this," quietly. That moment is emblematic of him. Not the cartel boss barking orders, but the botanist noticing deviation and correcting it before anyone else even sees it. And still, he's human. There's a moment, quiet, almost imperceptible, when Rafael stands too long outside one of the sorting sheds. Just stands there, eyes on the horizon. A young worker, perhaps 16, asks if everything is okay. Rafael turns, smiles faintly, and says, "It's growing too fast." The boy thinks he's talking about the plants. He isn't. He begins sleeping less, writing more. His notebooks multiply. Some say he starts designing new facilities farther south, planning for contingencies. Others say he simply senses the end approaching. Not clearly, but like a scent carried on desert wind. In 1983, DEA officials begin circling in closer. Kiki Camarena, operating out of Guadalajara, becomes a name that surfaces with increasing frequency in cartel conversations. And while Gallardo and Fonseca debate how to handle the threat, Rafael remains mostly quiet. There's a meeting in a low-lit room in Culiacan. A few key figures from different factions gather. The topic is interference. Rafael listens, doesn't interrupt, then says softly, "You can cut one weed and 5 more will grow. But if you poison the soil," he doesn't finish the sentence. He doesn't need to. Later, the DEA will call Rancho Buffalo one of the most audacious operations in the Western Hemisphere. They'll marvel at the logistics, the coordination, the agricultural mastery, but they'll never quite understand the man who ran it. Because Rafael was never just a trafficker. He was something harder to categorize, a cultivator of empire, both literal and figurative. The desert holds its breath, because nothing that perfect lasts forever. The sun beats down on Guadalajara like it's trying to erase the city from memory. Streets buzz with the usual chaos, vendors shouting over cumbia music, buses stalling in intersections, pigeons scavenging scraps of chicharron in the plazas. But beneath that rhythm, something heavier simmers. The Guadalajara cartel is no longer a hidden machine. It's a visible engine, one with polished chrome, but smoke starting to curl from under the hood. It's 1983, and Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo is busier than ever, meeting with politicians, arranging safe passage routes, and giving interviews to people who don't know they're giving interviews. Ernesto Fonseca Carrillo operates like a classic Don, flashy, opinionated, and quick to remind everyone who was here first, and Rafael Caro Quintero. He remains the quiet axis, less interested in the spotlight, more focused on ensuring his products don't just reach their destinations, but arrive pristine. But the rules are changing. Cocaine is pushing to the front of the game. The Colombians are growing impatient. The Americans are getting smarter. And inside this whirlwind, the Guadalajara cartel begins adapting. That's where Miguel's structure starts to shine. Every major region in Mexico is now represented under a loosely federated network. But loose networks fray fast. And the glue holding them together, that's starting to dry. Rafael, meanwhile, continues building what others call clean business fronts. He purchases properties, warehouses, and even a seafood restaurant, La Langosta, in the heart of Guadalajara. It's upscale, modern, and completely baffling to anyone who knows his roots. The man who once lived on frijoles and boiled roots is now the silent owner of a place where senators dine on imported scallops. Why? Because it's not about taste, it's about image. La Langosta becomes an unofficial meeting ground. Narcos dine in suits. Police commissioners toast brandy while looking the other way. Lawyers exchange briefcases with envelopes whose contents aren't legal but are entirely persuasive. Rafael rarely appears during peak hours, but his presence is felt. He's the reason the waiters memorize the real seating chart, the one that keeps rivals apart and allies near the fire exit. There's a table in the back, known quietly as El Vivero, the nursery. It's where deals germinate, sometimes in whispers, sometimes in glances. Rafael once told a colleague, "You can learn more by watching how a man eats shrimp than by reading his file." He wasn't joking. Still, Rafael doesn't linger in the restaurant business. It's a front, nothing more. What interests him most are the side conversations, the murmurs of new players, whispers of DEA activity, and the growing awareness that something, someone, is getting too close, that someone is Enrique Kiki Camarena, a Mexican-American DEA agent working out of the U.S. consulate. He's fluent in Spanish, good-looking, and dangerously thorough. Where other agents rely on third-hand reports and sloppy informants, Camarena walks the streets, listens to barbers, tips waiters generously. He builds maps, not of territories, but of habits. And habits, Rafael knows, are where the cracks begin. Do you remember the night Rafael sat on the restaurant rooftop, sipping lime water while reading a small notebook in the dark? The city blinked below him. A plane passed low. He wasn't reading crop data that time. He was reviewing a list of questions Camarena had reportedly asked around town, about Rancho Buffalo, about certain truck routes, about a woman who disappeared near a safe house. Many people still think that Rafael respected Camarena more than he feared him. So what do you think? Can admiration and paranoia exist in the same breath? Meanwhile, inside the cartel, the mood begins to shift. Gallardo grows frustrated with the American pressure. Fonseca becomes unpredictable, increasingly impatient with the way Rafael obsesses over leaves while the roof's on fire, as he once put it. But Rafael doesn't change. He continues refining, shipping, logging. He sends fewer messages by phone, more by courier. He trusts only 3 people to see his full ledgers, and none of them sleep well. The DEA's presence in Mexico is growing, but so is the cartel's insulation. Politicians receive envelopes, military officials receive trucks, and for a time it works. The game continues, until Rancho Buffalo becomes too perfect, too lucrative, and finally, too visible. In late 1984, a joint operation between Mexican forces and U.S. intelligence is launched. No press releases, no TV crews, just silence and boots in the desert. What they find shocks even seasoned agents. Hundreds of acres of cannabis, warehouses, drying stations, chemical storage, the full blueprint of a narco-scientific endeavor. They burn it all, not with ceremony, but with urgency. It takes days, possibly weeks. The air in Chihuahua smells like bitter smoke and ruined fortunes. When news reaches Rafael, he says nothing at first, just folds his napkin at La Langosta and nods once. That night, he returns to his home outside the city and walks into his private greenhouse, not the one for production, the one for study. Inside are dozens of orchids, succulents, and hybrid strains. plants with no monetary value, only curiosity. He sits for hours, just watching them. One guard later says he didn't move until the sun rose. The destruction of Rancho Buffalo is the first real blow, not just financially, but emotionally. Rafael's work was never just about product. It was about design, logic, mastery. And now, it's ash. The cartel scrambles. Meetings grow tenser. Rafael becomes quieter. Gallardo wants retaliation. Fonseca wants to replant. Rafael, he begins to ask the names of those who helped the DEA. That's the shift. Not in tone, not in posture, but in focus. The air in Guadalajara turns thinner after the fires at Rancho Buffalo. Not literally, the smog still hangs over the city like a tired veil, but spiritually. You can feel it in the glances exchanged at street corners, in the quiet that falls when certain names are spoken in bars. Rafael Caro Quintero is no longer just the quiet farmer with unusual discipline. He's the man who lost something enormous, and everyone is holding their breath, waiting to see how he responds. But he doesn't yell, doesn't call for war. He retreats into what he knows: order, silence, ritual. While Gallardo plots damage control and Fonseca fumes about betrayal, Rafael makes tea. That's the word used by his housekeeper, who notices he's begun brewing loose-leaf chamomile again, a habit he hadn't returned to in years. She says he does it carefully, methodically, and stares out the window while it steeps. She also notices he's sleeping less, reading more, walking the garden barefoot, even when the grass is wet. The man isn't unraveling. He's recalculating, and that's more dangerous. There's a strange duality to Rafael at this point in the story. On one hand, he's the soft-spoken cultivator who once brought soil samples to parties instead of cigars. On the other, he's now sitting in meetings where men discuss disappearances as casually as delivery schedules. He never raises his voice, just leans in and says, "How many were present? Or was it quick?" It's around this time that Rafael's myth begins to harden, not just among traffickers, but in communities that have watched him grow from field hand to phantom. Some say he's cursed, others say he's blessed. Either way, they agree on one thing. When he speaks, things move. Mainstream history tends to frame Rafael as either a genius or a monster. But the truth, like most truths, rests somewhere in the pause between sentences. So what do you think? Can a man be both architect and arsonist, builder and breaker? After Rancho Buffalo is destroyed, Rafael's earnings don't collapse, but they do constrict. The flow of marijuana slows. Colombian partners grow anxious. Internal tensions rise. And most of all, the Americans are no longer just suspicious. They're certain. The name Caro Quintero becomes a red flag in Washington. And Kiki Camarena? He's closer than ever. The DEA agent continues pulling threads. Quietly, steadily, methodically. Like Rafael, he has a fondness for patterns. He's mapping out cartel networks, not by hearsay, but through invoices, land deeds, delivery schedules. He begins noticing inconsistencies in vehicle registrations tied to Rafael's shell companies. Begins connecting drivers to distribution houses. Begins knocking on doors. Rafael hears about this. Through waiters, through police, through the woman who cuts his mother's hair. He doesn't react right away. Just circles certain names in his ledger, underlines addresses, and begins asking one very quiet, very dangerous question. How far will this man go? There's a dinner meeting in early 1985. 6 people at the table, including Rafael, Gallardo, and Fonseca. The atmosphere is thick, not with smoke, but with a sense of slipping control. Camarena is mentioned, then mentioned again. One man suggests bribing him, another suggests threatening his family. Rafael sips his water and says he's not interested in money, and threatening his wife would only make him louder. He's not wrong. Kiki Camarena, by all accounts, is incorruptible. He works long hours. He refuses protection. He believes in the badge. And that makes him uniquely vulnerable in a place where survival often depends on moral flexibility. Do you remember the old soldier Rafael once paid to install perimeter fencing at one of his grow sites? That man would later say, Caro didn't look like a man who feared consequence. He looked like a man who calculated it. In February 1985, everything changes. Camarena is kidnapped in broad daylight on his way to meet his wife for lunch. Witnesses say he's pulled into a car by men wearing government credentials. And then he vanishes. For weeks, nothing. The U.S. goes silent, publicly. But behind closed doors, Washington seethes. The Mexican government is pressured. The DEA goes into overdrive. Everyone knows who's involved. They just can't prove it. Not yet. Rafael doesn't go into hiding. He stays in Guadalajara, keeps up appearances, shows up to the restaurant, tends to his garden. But something in his eyes has changed. Less light, more calculation. He's not celebrating. He's waiting. And then the body is found, March 1985. The remains of Enrique Kiki Camarena are discovered, partially buried outside a ranch in Michoacan. The autopsy report is brutal. Torture, prolonged suffering, rage ripples through U.S. agencies. The word murder becomes assassination, and the investigation intensifies with surgical precision. Many people still think Rafael didn't order the killing himself, that it was Fonseca or Gallardo or one of the enforcers acting independently. But the debate remains open. So what do you think? Can silence equal consent when the silence comes from the top? Rafael says nothing publicly. No statements. No denials. He simply moves his inner circle farther from Guadalajara, begins moving assets, starts rotating safe houses every 4 days. His walk remains measured, his speech unhurried. But the man is preparing. There's a night not long after the body is found when Rafael walks the length of his childhood home in La Noria. The house is smaller than he remembers, the furniture older, the walls stained by years of cooking and smoke. He says nothing, just walks from room to room, nodding once to his sister, and sleeps in his old bed. That's when people start to realize he's saying goodbye, because when the fire comes next, it won't be quiet. The air in Guadalajara thickens with suspicion, not just the kind that flutters through alleys and tap rooms, but the official kind. Men in suits pacing embassy corridors, names highlighted on sheets with coffee stains, intercepted radio chatter cross-referenced with burned ledgers. After the discovery of Kiki Camarena's body in March 1985, everything accelerates. The quiet networks Rafael Caro Quintero once moved through with ease now feel like cages closing in. The U.S. government launches Operation Leyenda, the largest DEA homicide investigation in history. The mission is clear: find and bring to justice the men responsible for Camarena's torture and death. On the top of that list, Miguel Angel Felix Gallardo, Ernesto Fonseca Carrillo, and Rafael Caro Quintero. The old balance of invisibility and influence begins to collapse. Rafael senses it, not in panic, but in the shift of small details. A judge's handshake becomes tighter. A colonel cancels lunch. A cousin's phone no longer rings. Power in Mexico has always been relational, not official. But now, those relationships are peeling away, as if every ounce of political goodwill he'd banked over the years is evaporating. Still, he moves with discipline. No sudden flight, no frantic phone calls. Instead, he relocates to smaller properties, burns documents, and, some say, prays more often. There's a chapel in the hills outside Zapopan, rarely used, with rusted bells and a view of dust-colored foothills. A groundskeeper later says he saw Rafael there, alone, lighting a candle that wouldn't stay lit in the wind. But prayers won't help him now. The U.S. is furious, and Washington is demanding arrests. Publicly, Mexican officials denounce the murder. Privately, they scramble to clean house. Some officials resign overnight. Others vanish altogether. Rafael, meanwhile, begins to slip between properties with only a driver and one bodyguard. It's not that he trusts fewer people. It's that he no longer believes trust can be bought. Do you remember the soldier-turned-truck driver who helped Rafael escape a checkpoint near Leon? The man later claimed Rafael said only 3 words that entire drive: "Not yet, forward." Those words become folklore, especially after what happens next. April 1985. Mexican authorities finally act, sort of. Fonseca is arrested first, caught lounging poolside at a luxury villa. Gallardo retreats into the shadows, and Rafael, he disappears, vanished, just like that. For weeks, speculation runs wild. Some say he's been protected by a military faction. Others say he's crossed into the jungle lowlands near Chiapas, or boarded a private plane to Bolivia. One theory even claims he shaved his head and disguised himself as a Catholic priest. No confirmation, no footprints, just rumors and fear. Then comes the break. April 4th, 1985, Costa Rica, a compound near the village of Alajuela. A quiet operation unfolds before dawn, led by a joint effort between Mexican and Costa Rican authorities, with DEA pressure lurking behind every clipboard. They find Rafael there, calm, unarmed, and wearing a light linen shirt. No resistance, just a small smile and the question, did the orchid survive the flight? The arrest doesn't make headlines immediately. It takes days to filter through the bureaucracies. When it does, Mexico exhales, not with joy, but with a strange mix of embarrassment and relief. Rafael is flown back under heavy guard. Journalists snap blurry photos. One shows him ducking his head slightly as he boards the plane, more like a man caught trespassing than one at the center of a geopolitical uproar. Many people still think that Rafael allowed himself to be captured, that he saw no path forward and chose dignity over desperation. So, what do you think? Is surrender always defeat? Or can it be a calculated retreat? Upon return, he's imprisoned at Reclusorio Preventivo Oriente in Mexico City. The press floods with stories, some factual, many inflated. One claims he demanded a special diet of steamed vegetables and herbal teas. Another says he refused to speak to guards for the first 10 days. The truth? Rafael remains mostly quiet, mostly composed, and entirely unreadable. His trial begins with fanfare, but the process is murky. Evidence is mishandled. Witnesses contradict themselves, and behind the scenes, forces maneuver to protect larger interests. Rafael is convicted of Camarena's kidnapping and murder, though how directly he was involved remains a matter of debate. He receives a 40-year sentence. Inside prison, he doesn't behave like other narcos. He avoids forming gangs, declines luxuries offered by guards, requests books, mostly botany and theology. One librarian recalls him reading an entire 300-page manual on seed conservation twice, then asking for a blank notebook to copy out passages in his own words. Time doesn't soften him, but it doesn't harden him either. It simply focuses him. He begins writing private letters, charts, reflections. He mentors younger inmates, not in smuggling, but in soil health. He even starts a small greenhouse program within the prison, which, despite initial resistance, is eventually allowed. There's a subtle irony here. The man who was hunted as a ghost becomes the most visible figure in the system, and yet remains unreadable. He gives no interviews, refuses to comment on Camarena, and when asked by a fellow inmate how he feels about the past, he answers, "It grew, then it was harvested." That's the cycle. One DEA agent, still active during the early 2000s, said of Rafael, "He was the only guy we caught who didn't deny, brag, or beg. He just was." Back in La Noria, the family home stays quiet. The door is painted once a year. The garden is kept. Locals still lower their voices when his name is spoken. Not out of fear, but out of some strange, stubborn reverence. Because even in prison, Rafael Caro Quintero doesn't vanish. He cultivates. Incarceration, for most, is a collapse, a reduction of identity, of movement, of voice. But for Rafael Caro Quintero, prison becomes something else entirely. Not quite sanctuary, not quite sentence, more like a greenhouse under lock and key. The walls close in, yes, but they also do something unexpected. They isolate him from the chaos he can no longer control. And within that silence, he begins to grow something again. Puente Grande Prison, where Rafael is eventually transferred, isn't just a facility. It's a paradox. Infamous for housing the most dangerous and most connected criminals in Mexico. It's a place where gangsters run small kingdoms from inside their cells. But Rafael isn't interested in building a faction. He doesn't issue threats or orchestrate street-level orders. Instead, he requests books, stacks of them, agronomy, microbiology, old texts on Mayan farming techniques. Prison officials aren't quite sure what to make of it. Most inmates ask for visitors. Rafael asks for soil samples. Eventually, he's permitted access to a small courtyard behind the chapel. What begins as a few planters becomes an intricate arrangement of native herbs, leafy vegetables, and, according to one guard, a delicate arrangement of morning glories that bloom precisely at 7 a.m. He doesn't talk much, but when he does, he speaks with the same quiet authority that once steadied lieutenants in boardrooms and men with machetes in remote fields. Newer inmates approach him cautiously, some out of curiosity, some out of awe. He doesn't push them away. He listens to their stories, offers advice when asked, but never about escape, or money, or revenge, only about plants. One young inmate later tells a journalist, "He taught me to compost, but what he really taught me was patience." Another recalls Rafael saying, "You don't own the garden, you only manage it." Same with power. Outside the prison walls, the cartel world begins to shift. Gallardo is arrested. The Guadalajara cartel fractures, splitting into the Sinaloa, Juarez, and Tijuana factions. Blood spills, territories realign, and new names rise: El Chapo Guzman, Amado Carrillo Fuentes, the Arellano Felix brothers. But Rafael, he stays out of it. The newspapers mention his name less and less, and yet whispers persist that he's still advising, that notes scribbled on recycled paper are passed through couriers to lieutenants who interpret his diagrams like sacred texts, that even in prison, he's still the one some turn to when things grow too unstable. many people still think that his silence was more powerful than Gallardo's speeches. So, what do you think? Can absence deepen authority more than presence ever could? There's a famous anecdote from 1999. A university professor is invited to the prison to speak on sustainable agriculture. He's warned that the inmates might be restless, uninterested. Instead, he finds himself answering detailed questions about crop rotation cycles and nitrate fixation from a man in a blue prison shirt, sitting under a ficus tree. The professor later claims the man's knowledge rivaled most of his graduate students. That man, of course, was Rafael. Do you remember the prison guard who described Rafael's cell as more like a study than a bunk? The desk always clean. The walls lined with clippings of plant diagrams, not pinups. And one picture, taped crookedly near the window, of a small plot of land in Sinaloa. A garden. Possibly the only thing he truly missed. His family visits sporadically. His mother sends rosaries. His siblings bring newspapers. Once, his sister smuggles in a folded page from a farming magazine with a new technique for drip irrigation. He reads it like scripture, then tucks it into his notebook without a word. And yet, through all the study and soil, there's still a tension beneath Rafael's calm. He doesn't ask for updates on politics, but he notices the guards rotating more often, notices the interrogators who come not with files, but with open-ended questions. Did you ever meet Camarena? Was Rancho Buffalo your idea? What did you know about the Guadalajara operation after 1985? He always answers the same way. I don't remember. It's not defiance. It's consistency. Over decades, the man gives almost nothing away. No confessions, no dramatic claims, just that even tone, as if recounting weather patterns. Mainstream historical documents confirm that the DEA and other U.S. intelligence agencies continued to view Rafael as a person of interest through the 90s and early 2000s. Despite being behind bars, his name lingered on watch lists, funding audits, and whispered conversations across agencies. In a 2004 interview, one retired DEA agent said, "If you asked anyone who the smartest trafficker in Mexican history was, they'd say Caro Quintero. If you asked who the most dangerous was, they'd pause and say it again." Inside, Rafael's life settles into its muted rhythm. He writes, he gardens, he teaches. The prison even starts unofficially referring certain inmates to him for advice. Not legal advice, but spiritual, behavioral. How to endure a sentence without self-destruction. How to keep the mind sharp when the walls don't move. The man who once managed fields of hundreds now trims tomato vines behind a concrete wall. And yet, there's something symmetrical about it. The quiet, the repetition, the sense of waiting for something to bloom. In 2009, a small article in a regional paper mentions his name again. A blip, a rumor, that he might be released early due to time served and procedural errors in his trial. It vanishes quickly, but not before being clipped and added to a growing pile of newspaper scraps taped inside his cabinet. Then in 2010, the world shifts again. Digital surveillance explodes. Cartel wars escalate. And names from the past, Rafael's included, begin appearing in new contexts. Younger players reference him not as a legend, but as a template, a model of what power used to look like: calm, clean, efficient, before the chaos. And Rafael? He simply keeps tending. By the time the second decade of Rafael Caro Quintero's sentence begins, he's no longer just an inmate. He's an institution. The staff at Puente Grande know him by his habits. Guards assign themselves to his wing without protest. Even the warden admits, off the record, that he's never caused a single problem. Not once. And yet, beneath that layer of serenity, something begins to stir. The year is 2012. In the outside world, Mexico is in the grip of escalating cartel violence. Entire towns fall under control of rival factions. The press is flooded with stories of shootouts, mass graves, and narco-politics seeping into state elections. But inside Rafael's cell, the rhythm remains unchanged. He still rises early, still boils his own tea, still tracks rainfall through cracks in the wall, and cross-references it with mold growth on his small courtyard garden. Then the lawyers arrive, quietly at first, then persistently. They come bearing files, legal technicalities, questions about due process. They cite decisions made by higher courts and argue that Rafael's conviction, while severe, may not hold up under newer interpretations of extradition law. It's not a retrial. It's a legal glitch, a loophole. Rafael listens politely, doesn't interrupt, then says, "You think this is real or just noise?" They don't answer, but the noise gets louder. In early 2013, a federal court rules that Rafael Caro Quintero was improperly tried in federal court for a crime that, at the time, should have been processed at the state level. It's a technical ruling, not a moral one. But it cracks the cell door. And then, shockingly, on August 9th, 2013, Rafael is released. Just like that. No warning, no fanfare, no last-minute injunction. He walks out of Puente Grande a free man, steps into the hot morning air, and disappears into a waiting car. Mainstream headlines explode. Narco kingpin freed. Caro Quintero, out after 28 years. U.S. officials are blindsided. The DEA issues urgent memos. Washington erupts with statements of disbelief. Rafael becomes, overnight, the most sought-after man in the Western Hemisphere. But he is already gone. Vanished. Not to a villa, not to a penthouse, to the Sierra Madre. Do you remember that phrase the old priest once whispered in a Sinaloan village? He went back to the soil, like a good seed does. That's how people describe his disappearance, as if it were natural, inevitable, and completely untraceable. Many people still think that Rafael had this plan in place for years, that the legal appeal was simply the final move in a game he'd been playing in silence. So what do you think? Can a man garden his way through a prison term into freedom? In the weeks following his release, the Mexican government scrambles to issue a new warrant. The U.S. calls for extradition. Rewards are posted. Surveillance sweeps the northern mountains. Rumors begin to swirl. He was seen in Sonora. No, in Durango. A woman in a small village claims he bought seeds from her store. A rancher reports someone asking about drip lines and rare citrus, but no photos emerge, no confirmed sightings, just echoes. Meanwhile, his legend grows. He becomes less man, more myth. Ballads are written. Cartel youth begin quoting him, second-hand phrases about patience and precision. One mural, painted in a Sinaloan mechanic shop, shows a faceless figure walking into green hills, trailed not by soldiers, but by vines. Back in the U.S., authorities press harder. In 2015, the DEA adds Rafael to its top 10 most wanted list, offering a $20 million reward for information leading to his capture, the highest ever posted at the time for a drug trafficker. But the mountains are old, and they remember their own. Locals in the Sierra Madre say he moves only at night, that he sleeps under a different roof every third evening, that he avoids cell phones, doesn't trust even his own nephews. A whisper network surrounds him. Elders, former workers, sympathetic ranchers who remember when he bought their children's school books and fertilizer in the same week. In one story, an American photographer hiking the Copper Canyon claims to have seen a man matching Rafael's description sitting on a rock, watching the valley. He looked like someone who was remembering something, she said. Then he nodded at me, stood up, and vanished behind the trees. If it was him, he didn't seem surprised to be seen. The Mexican government, under intense pressure, increases military presence in the northern states. Raids are conducted, drones deployed. Still, nothing. It's as if Rafael has dissolved into the terrain. Mainstream analysts argue about what he's doing during these fugitive years. Some say he's rebuilding networks, quietly retaking influence in the Sinaloa cartel. Others insist he's retired, living a monk-like existence in exile. And then there are those who believe he's simply surviving, waiting out the storm, trusting that the world will move on if he remains still enough. But silence doesn't erase history, it only deepens it. There's a curious moment in 2017. A handwritten letter, allegedly from Rafael, is delivered anonymously to a news outlet. In it, he claims he had no role in Kiki Camarena's death, that he was scapegoated, that he was used by larger forces. The handwriting matches old prison documents. The tone is familiar, measured, technical, never pleading. He ends the note with, "I do not run. I walk. Always." The letter fades from the headlines within days, but not from memory, because for a man who spent a lifetime cultivating growth in the most unlikely places, disappearing wasn't failure, it was strategy. The Sierra Madre isn't just a mountain range, it's a boundary between noise and quiet, between the modern world and the old codes, and for Rafael Caro Quintero, it becomes something deeper, a shield. After his 2013 release and sudden disappearance, the authorities hunt. The headlines shout, but the land stays quiet. It has protected men before. It chooses when to speak. In the hills, stories grow faster than weeds. Some say Rafael travels only by foot, moving from ranch to ranch, never sleeping in the same hammock twice. Others swear he lives in a cave behind a waterfall, emerging only when the moon is low. Of course, none of these are confirmed, but none are dismissed either. The truth is more ordinary and more haunting. He's there, all right, somewhere in that stretch of jagged rock and dust, woven between ravines and goat paths. But he's not hiding in the way most imagine. There's no central compound, no militia-guarded estate, just a man who knows how to vanish with grace, a man who walks with a bag of seeds, not a gun. He avoids phones, of course, no digital footprint. Communication is face-to-face, or via trusted couriers who deliver notes sealed with wax. The messages are brief, cryptic. One recipient remembers receiving a scrap of paper with nothing but a drawing, a pair of leaves, forked at the vein. They burned the paper after memorizing it. Whether it meant meet here or wait longer, they never said. Meanwhile, the world outside churns. New presidents take office. Cartels rise, splinter, reform. The Sinaloa cartel, once feared and focused, becomes an octopus. Too many arms, too many heads. The DEA grows more frustrated. Journalists write long pieces filled with expert quotes and no new leads. And yet, Rafael's name stays current. A ghost with a price tag. $20 million for his capture. The highest bounty ever placed on a Mexican fugitive. But money doesn't move mountains, especially when those mountains remember kindness. Do you remember the rancher who once found his lost cow returned overnight, with fresh salt blocks tied to its horns? He swears it was Rafael. "Only one man would know the exact salt I use," he said, shaking his head, "and care enough to return it quietly." That's the kind of legacy that gets built when your power grows from roots, not bullets. Many people still think Rafael was actively controlling cartel operations during this time, coordinating shipments, laundering profits, arranging alliances through silence and suggestion. Others argue he was done, that he'd become a relic, more useful as myth than mechanism. So what do you think? Can someone who once ruled an empire truly step away from the throne? Or does the empire find its way back to him? There's one recorded sighting in 2016, a blurry photo, taken from a distance, showing a man in a faded shirt tending to a small garden behind a cabin in Durango. No weapons, no guards, just plants. The source vanishes before the image can be authenticated. But some DEA analysts believe it was real. The angle of the shoulders, they said, the hands in the soil. Meanwhile, Rafael's legal team reemerges, file motions, speak to press, claim his arrest was invalid, that he's being unfairly targeted. But the man himself? Silent. Always. He becomes a symbol. To young traffickers, he's the archetype of patience. The man who built a kingdom, lost it, and refused to rage. To villagers, he's the patron who once funded water towers and kept the army away. To law enforcement, he's the ghost who still outsmarts satellites. There's a ballad written around this time, played softly in cantinas, never on the radio. Its chorus, translated, goes, "The botanist left in silence, with mud on his hands, not blood. He planted the wind in the canyon and vanished where no road could." It's romanticized, yes, but not untrue. In 2018, whispers emerged that Rafael is ill, something with his kidneys or his back. A doctor is flown to a mountain village under a false name. He treats a man who speaks little and listens deeply. The doctor leaves with a fresh mule and 2 envelopes, one for his silence and one for his son's tuition. Even in exile, Rafael remains meticulous, a retired official later notes. The man never left loose ends. Even in hiding, you could feel the edges of his decisions. It's the kind of statement that could be flattery or fear, but time, like soil, eventually changes everything. By 2020, the world is different. COVID-19 hits Mexico hard, borders tighten, drone surveillance expands, and yet no sign of Rafael. Cartel violence surges. Names like El Mencho and Ovidio Guzman dominate the news, but beneath all that noise, older voices still say, "Caro Quintero, he's not gone. He's just further in, further in." That becomes the unofficial term, used by truckers, farmers, even government operatives. If someone disappears, if a shipment moves too cleanly, if a new marijuana strain surfaces with eerie precision, someone mutters, "He's further in," as if Rafael is the mountain itself, not hiding inside it, but as it. Do you remember the dried flower found at a raid site in 2021? A rare orchid, native only to a specific altitude in the Sierra Madre, tucked inside a hollow book. No message, just placement. Maybe it meant nothing, or maybe it meant still watching. Rain falls differently in the Sierra Madre. It doesn't crash, it whispers, threading between the trees like a secret retold in hush. And somewhere within that green hush, in the years following his 2013 release, Rafael Caro Quintero continues to exist. Not in a safe house or a compound, but in the folds of a legend. A man without a phone, without a clear photo, without a reliable last known location. Just presence. But presence doesn't always mean command. By 2022, Rafael has become something stranger than a fugitive. He's become folklore with fingerprints. Law enforcement still hunts him, yes, but to the people in the hills, he's not a target. He's El Señor del Monte, the man of the mountain. Some claim to have heard his voice near water springs. Others say they've seen a figure tending to wild agave as the fog rolls in. Always at a distance. Always respectful. The U.S. doesn't care for such mystique. His face remains on the DEA's most wanted list. The $20 million bounty remains intact. New technology, thermal drones, signal interceptors, satellite pattern analysis is brought to bear. But it's like chasing vapor. One DEA analyst likens it to tracking a tree that moves every night but leaves no footprints. Another says, the man is a ghost with graduate-level geography skills, but ghosts slip, and Rafael finally does. On July 15, 2022, Mexican authorities announce a capture. The details are odd, not dramatic, no shootout, no convoy crash. Just an operation conducted in Sinaloa, near the town of San Simon in the Schwa municipality, deep in the hills. A quiet takedown. A man arrested without a fight. He's flown by helicopter, flanked by masked Marines, his gray beard and lined face barely visible in grainy footage. He looks older, thinner, still composed, but something doesn't sit right. The first wave of disbelief comes from locals. That's not him, one rancher tells a reporter. Too tall. Eyes are wrong. Online, theories flare. Side-by-side images are posted. Comparisons drawn. Conspiracies fester. Was it a body double? A decoy? A placeholder to calm political pressure from the U.S.? The Mexican government insists it's Rafael. The DNA, they claim, matches. The fingerprints align. Official channels confirm. But the legend pushes back. In bars across Sonora, men whisper about decoys trained for years. In Durango, a shopkeeper says she saw the real Rafael just a week after the arrest, buying nails and rope, paying with old bills folded like letters. In Chihuahua, a schoolteacher swears she found a botanical diagram taped to her gate, signed only with the drawing of a petal. Still, the man captured is taken to El Altiplano, Mexico's highest security prison. The same place where El Chapo once escaped through a mile-long tunnel. Rafael does not attempt escape. He is quiet. His lawyers protest the legality of his reapprehension. The U.S. renews its extradition request. Mexico stalls. Bureaucracy wraps itself around the case like ivy, and yet, there's no interview, no speech, no admission or denial. Just a man who says, when asked by a prison official, "I'd like soil to walk on, not concrete." That request, obviously, is denied. Mainstream historical record confirms the arrest. But interpretation? That's another matter. Many people still think the man arrested in 2022 was not Rafael Caro Quintero, that the real man remains in the hills, perhaps ill, perhaps retired, perhaps watching. So what do you think? Does a legend end when the cuffs click, or when the story forgets him? In the villages, old men still speak of him as if he's alive and near. They remember the gifts, the medical supplies during bad harvests, the clean water delivered when the government didn't show. These aren't fabrications. These are memories. One man, blind in one eye, says he was once guided through the forest by Rafael himself, not as a favor, but as a matter of rhythm. He moved like he never needed to ask permission, the man says. And the forest never told him no. In prison, the captured man tends to a small courtyard garden, a few potted herbs, a cactus, maybe a rose or two. A guard later says he never complains, just waters the plants, watches them, waits. But it's hard to know if the man behind the watering can is really the botanist who once ruled a kingdom of green. The silence is so complete, so symmetrical with the man we remember that it almost reinforces the doubt. There's a phrase that starts circulating in 2023 among rural farmers. La raíz no muere si se entierra hondo. The root does not die if it's buried deep. It's not just about plants. Do you remember the photo? The one taken in 2024. A blurry image from a trail camera in Durango. It shows a man walking with a limp, a wide-brimmed hat pulled low, holding a bundle of sticks. The timestamp is real, the distance unclear. Some say it's a rancher. Others aren't so sure. In the photo's background, just barely visible, is a small structure, a greenhouse, half covered in tarp, overgrown but unmistakable, and no one has found it since. A greenhouse, half covered and swallowed by forest. That's all it takes. Just one blurred image, a shape behind leaves, a structure not listed on any property registry. And suddenly, the legend of Rafael Caro Quintero breathes again. The authorities deny its relevance. Coincidence, says one official. There are dozens of abandoned greenhouses in that region. But those who know the terrain, those who've lived in the Sierra Madre long enough to tell the difference between what's there and what's meant to be seen, don't dismiss it so easily. Somewhere around that structure, rumors begin to sprout again. He walked past my house last winter. A woman in Chihuahua says, her voice low. Didn't say a word, just tipped his hat. Same eyes. Another swears he spotted Rafael on a mule trail, leading a donkey loaded with burlap sacks that smelled faintly of mint and something older. The man knows how to vanish, he mutters, and how to grow what shouldn't. Back in El Altiplano, the man who may be Rafael continues to tend his modest courtyard. He speaks to almost no one, requests few privileges, and keeps a single notebook. Not a diary, not a confession, just sketches. Rows of neat, leaf-like drawings and notations in pencil. Soil pH levels, root systems, rainfall conversion metrics. One guard calls it the quietest obsession I've ever seen. When asked directly, "Are you Rafael Caro Quintero?" he reportedly smiles and says, "A name isn't what matters." That same month, journalists uncover a strange pattern. Shipments of an unusually high-quality marijuana strain have begun circulating in small batches through Baja and Sonora. The packaging is unremarkable, but the consistency, the purity, is uncanny. Too refined for the younger groups, too deliberate. Someone, somewhere, is growing with knowledge that was lost in the noise of modern narco-trafficking. DEA analysts notice too. They start calling it La Flor Fantasma, the ghost flower. One analyst writes in a classified memo, "It resembles strains linked to Caro Quintero's old fields. Same terpene profile, same slow-dried finish. But none of the current cartels claim it. That, in itself, is unusual, and the legends multiply. Many people still think that Rafael trained someone, or many, during his prison years, that he passed on his knowledge like a monk transcribing scrolls, that the silence wasn't just retreat, but preparation. So what do you think? Can wisdom, once planted, continue to grow without its gardener? The greenhouse theory gains traction. A group of university students working on a remote ecology survey near Schwa report finding a garden too ordered to be accidental. Rows of plants cultivated between native trees, irrigation tubing made from reworked bicycle tires, a compost pile that smelled faintly of citrus and chamomile. No signs of habitation, just precision. They returned the next day. Everything was gone. Even the soil looked swept. Meanwhile, in Mexico City, the legal battle over extradition drags on. The man in El Altiplano remains behind bars, his status in limbo. The U.S. wants him. Mexico stalls. Protests arise from human rights groups claiming procedural violations, and Rafael's lawyers argue that their client is too ill, too old, and subtly, perhaps not who they think. The man, for his part, says nothing. There's a curious moment during a prison inspection in late 2023. A new warden visits his wing and attempts small talk. "I hear you were once a kingpin." "I was a farmer." "That's not what the world says." "The world's soil is poor," the man replies. So of course it produces poor stories. That quote makes it into a leaked memo. It gets shared online, reposted, mistranslated, but its meaning lingers. In Sinaloa, an altar is built, not in a chapel, but at the base of a hill, where local farmers say El Patron once walked. It's not ostentatious, just a ring of stones, a sapling in the center, and 3 marigolds placed at its roots. No name, no plaque, just a gesture. In a cantina nearby, an old man with a limp plays a song on a weathered guitar. No lyrics, just a melody that rises slowly, then drops like dusk behind a canyon. He plays it every Friday. One night, a man in a gray hat listens in silence, drinks his coffee, then leaves behind a packet of heirloom tomato seeds on the bar. "Do you remember the farmer who said his crops came back stronger the year after Rafael vanished into the hills? He didn't blame luck. Some soil just remembers the right touch," he said, and maybe that's the final truth. Whether he sits in a prison cell or in the curve of a ravine, Rafael Caro Quintero is no longer just a man. He is a method, a way of being, quiet power rooted in patience, growth without noise, precision without pride. Somewhere, a greenhouse still stands, hidden or perhaps burned down again. Somewhere, a leaf curls at the exact right angle, a vine clings to a handmade trellis, and a man with steady hands adjusts the water flow not because anyone will see, but because that's what the plant needs. Because no matter where you bury the root, it remembers how to rise. The year turns again. Another season fades through the canyons, and yet the story of Rafael Caro Quintero clings to the air like mountain mist, never fully seen, never fully gone. The man, the myth, and the question. Where does a legend rest when even exile feels choreographed? By 2024, the conversation around him has split into 2 clear factions. One believes he is indeed back in custody, quietly aging within the walls of El Altiplano, reading and tending to his potted plants. The other insists that the man arrested was not Rafael at all, but a stand-in, a shadow, a placeholder to buy quiet for the real one, who still moves in the folds of the Sierra. And then another whisper drifts in. It starts with an intercepted message, a low-priority radio chatter, caught during a surveillance sweep over northern Sinaloa. The content is mundane, almost too mundane. Inventory check, mention of seed stores, a time, a place, and a phrase buried between 2 long silences. We'll ask the old one about the south-facing slope. It means nothing, officially, but one retired DEA analyst, poring over the logs, pauses. South-facing slope. That was Rafael's preference, always. Better sun exposure, better runoff. And the old one, not a code name, not a nickname in modern use, but a phrase used by his former lieutenants decades ago. Coincidence? Maybe. Still, 2 weeks later, a task force is assembled and sent to the general vicinity. They find nothing. No people. No plants. But an odd trace remains. Rows of disturbed earth, evenly spaced. A small burned log with a scalded metal rod beside it, shaped like an R. It could mean anything. Or it could mean everything. Meanwhile, the man in El Altiplano continues his routine. His health, reportedly, is in decline. Kidney issues, degenerative spine condition, He walks slower now, sits longer, but never complains, never asks for comfort. Just more pages, more pencil lead, more time in the open air. A guard mentions that when it rains, he requests the window be left ajar, just so he can hear it hit the concrete. It's in these small details that the lines between legend and man blur. Rafael, whether inside the cell or still outside, remains a figure whose strength was never measured by violence. That's what separates him. The cartels that followed erupted in blood and noise. El Chapo's escape tunnels, the Zetas' terror tactics. Even the latest generation of narcos rely on firepower more than finesse. But Rafael? He was never the storm. He was the weather pattern behind it. Many people still think that his long silence wasn't retirement, but evolution. That he had shifted from kingpin to something quieter, older, perhaps even more dangerous in its stillness. So what do you think? Is control that no longer seeks to control still power? One former soldier tells of a brief meeting in a forest path in 2021. He had been tracking illegal logging routes when he came upon a man, face mostly obscured by sun and brim, who asked him simply, "Why damage something that can feed you?" No threats, just a question. The soldier answered with silence. The man nodded once, then kept walking. Was it him? Who knows? But the legend grows. There's a new generation of botanists in northern Mexico. Quiet young men with well-worn notebooks and odd gardening habits. They refer to a technique called La Curva del Norte, not found in textbooks, not used in modern agriculture, but passed from voice to voice, like folklore, and always. It's said to have come from the old man in the mountains. Back in El Altiplano, a shipment of books arrives for the man, mostly about soil, microbial networks, one volume on hydroponics. The guards joke that maybe he's building a garden in his head now. But when one skims the margin of a returned book, they find something curious. An annotation beside a paragraph about vertical root structures. Not enough oxygen, too fast, needs darkness first. That's Rafael, or at least that's what they believe. In Sinaloa, another strange thing happens. A strain of marijuana begins circulating among older growers, not for sale, but for pride. It's known locally as El Silencio, not flashy, not wildly potent, but steady, balanced, the kind of product that doesn't scream. It hums, and older men nod when they smell it. "He's back," one of them says. Or maybe he never left. A journalist travels north to investigate. She visits 10 villages, interviews 15 growers, and hears the same phrase repeated in different dialects. He didn't teach us everything, just enough to grow without him. And maybe that was the point all along. Do you remember the time Rafael refused a gift of gold rings from a politician in 1982? He simply said, "Gold doesn't help seeds." The politician laughed. Rafael didn't. That same clarity runs through every thread of his life. He never chased chaos. He chased consistency. He never ordered headlines. He ordered symmetry. Whether in a prison cell or in the hills, Rafael Caro Quintero remains untouched by the urgency of this century. He's not chasing relevance. He's maintaining a garden that was planted long ago, whether in soil or in people. And some gardens grow best in silence. There's a certain kind of quiet that only exists in the last hour before dawn, when even the coyotes sleep, when the air stops moving, when time seems to fold gently over itself. In the mountains of Sinaloa, some believe Rafael Caro Quintero is most alive in this silence, not plotting, not hiding, just being, a man whose rhythm no longer syncs with clocks, only with weather and breath. It is now 2025. A new generation leads the cartels, their names sharp and fast, their movements viral, violent, often sloppy. The age of polished, orderly empires has given way to fragmentation. Yet Rafael's story lingers, not just in textbooks or narco corridos, but in the way old men arrange their tools, or how a single row of plants curves just slightly downhill in the exact way he once taught. Meanwhile, the man held in El Altiplano still tends his garden. It's modest, no more than a few planters of herbs and local grasses, but he cares for it with the same hands that once cultivated Rancho Buffalo. To the guards, he is polite, measured, almost unnervingly calm. One describes watching him stare at a flowering basil stalk for 20 minutes without moving. They wonder what he's remembering. Outside those walls, the rumors have only grown bolder. A child in Durango draws a map in crayon. Mountains, rivers, and a small red dot marked with an R. When asked what it means, he shrugs. That's where the man with the beard lives. His uncle, an old mechanic, stares at the paper a long time before quietly folding it and placing it in his pocket. A woman in Schwa finds her garden torn up by wild pigs. The next morning, it's been replanted. Rows perfectly straight, seedlings saved, and a single yellow orchid left on her doorstep. All of this means nothing, or everything. Many people still think that the longer Rafael is neither fully proven dead nor confirmed truly alive, the more powerful he becomes. That the ambiguity itself is the final act of control. So what do you think? Is absence a kind of authorship? The extradition request still sits on desks in Mexico City. U.S. officials continue to press, but paperwork slows, appeals stall, and somewhere deep within the bureaucracy, it's unclear whether anyone even wants the story to end. Back in the cell, Rafael, or the man claiming to be Rafael, writes one final letter. It's short, handwritten, the paper thin. No signature. It says, "What grows in light is easy. What grows in dark is earned. If this is justice, may it be quiet. If not, may it pass like rain." The letter is never mailed. It's found inside a copy of Botanica del Norte, donated later to a prison library. A week later, the man stops speaking altogether. Still walks, still reads, but not a word to staff or inmates. A doctor examines him, finds no physical cause. When asked if he's choosing silence, the man shrugs once, then returns to trimming a vine with a plastic spoon he's filed into a blade. Silence becomes his companion, and the world spins on. In a distant village, a man plants a new strain of tomato said to resist drought and pests. He won't say where he got the seeds, just that an old friend passed them along with no name. The plants bloom quickly, evenly. When a visiting agricultural student remarks on their health, the man only says, "They were grown by someone who understood waiting." Do you remember the boy who asked his grandfather why their avocado trees always seemed fuller than the neighbors? The grandfather answered without looking up, "Because we don't rush them, and because someone once showed me where to dig, somewhere something is still growing." And that's what Rafael was always about. Not the violence, not the headlines, but the method. The idea that power, real power, is slow, controlled, rooted. So whether he sits in a concrete cell or behind a curtain of trees, the effect is the same. Patience keeps paying dividends. In his absence, even the weeds straighten up a little. In the highlands, when fog rolls low, some still leave gifts at trailheads. A folded leaf, a tin of tobacco, a drawing of an orchid. Not for worship, not for attention, just in case, and when the breeze shifts, carrying the smell of moss and soil freshly turned, more than one villager looks up and says, "He's near." They don't mean it literally, not always, because sometimes people become echoes, not ghosts, not saints, just rhythms that never left. And Rafael Caro Quintero, whether behind glass or under pine, has become something more than a trafficker. He's become a timing, a method, a presence, and somewhere, something still blooms in silence. Rainwater collects in the grooves of the prison yard as dawn rises over El Altiplano. Inside its thick gray walls, nothing much changes. Guards shift, schedules repeat, metal doors echo. But down one corridor, in a quiet, supervised garden plot, the man they call Rafael Caro Quintero is examining a small curl in a mint stalk. His fingers work slowly, like they always have, checking stem density, moisture retention, the faint smell at the base of the stalk. He doesn't look up when the guard arrives with papers, just says, "Don't water too soon after sunset. It bruises the root." Outside, however, the world is decidedly less still. In 2025, Mexico's security landscape is once again mutating. New factions rise and fall like waves. Armed convoys parade through towns, while politicians promise peace from podiums. And through it all, Rafael's name keeps drifting into places it doesn't belong. Interrogation transcripts, intercepted texts, scrawled warnings found on cardboard taped to poles. The question is always the same. Is he still involved? Officially, he's in custody, serving a sentence, awaiting possible extradition. Unarmed, aging, a non-factor. Unofficially? Well, that's murkier. In a remote farming village, crates of a peculiar fertilizer arrive unmarked. The label contains no brand, only a string of numbers referencing an old university study on yield maximization. The method? One Rafael allegedly pioneered in the 1980s, buried in a forgotten manual. It works, and it spreads. A cooperative of growers in Sonora suddenly begins outperforming their neighbors. Their soil holds moisture longer. Their yields are uniform. They claim they're just lucky. But one elder slips, saying, "Luck is the name we use when someone smarter has been here before." And still, nothing definitive ties it to Rafael. Many people still think the cartel world outgrew him, that modern trafficking has evolved too far beyond plants and patience. So what do you think? Can a blueprint built on discipline still shape a storm of chaos? Back inside the prison, Rafael continues to read. His books are annotated now in finer script, margins tight, thoughts compressed. A former academic, assigned briefly to the prison's educational wing, reviews one and mutters, "He's building something. Maybe not with bricks, but definitely with logic." During a rare medical check, the doctor asks how he's feeling. Rafael shrugs and says, "That depends on the plants. The ones out back, the ones in here," he replies, tapping his temple. It's unclear if he means ideas, memories, or something else entirely. One night, a guard hears humming. Not a tune exactly, just a low, steady tone from his cell. When asked about it later, Rafael says, "It helps the roots grow." He doesn't explain whose roots or where they are. Meanwhile, another sighting is reported, not officially, but through the old channels. A man spotted walking alone along a dried arroyo in Chihuahua, his gait slow but confident. Dressed in old jeans, shirt open at the collar, carrying a wrapped bundle that looked suspiciously like saplings. The witness doesn't take a photo. Says he didn't dare interrupt. Was it Rafael or someone playing him? The more time passes, the more the ambiguity itself becomes useful. Cartel players invoke his name in negotiation. I was trained by the old one. We grow the Sinaloa way. It doesn't matter if it's true. The invocation is power enough. Back in prison, Rafael receives no visitors by his own request. Once a month, he writes a letter. It's sent to a nondescript address in Sinaloa. No return expected. The letters contain diagrams, lists of dates, weather notations. One that leaked reads simply, "April's moon won't pull moisture fast enough. Wait until May." And then, one morning, a flower blooms on the inner wall of the courtyard. A guard swears no one planted it. The petals are yellow with purple veins. The same variety Rafael used to keep in his private greenhouse decades ago. When asked about it, he only says, "It came back because I remembered it." Is that possible? Maybe not in a textbook, but in the slow, personal science that Rafael spent a lifetime perfecting, maybe. Do you remember the phrase he once told a young inmate, long before the world remembered his name again? Nothing worth keeping grows overnight. That inmate, now out, runs a small organic farm in southern Sonora. His tomatoes are the most consistent in the region. He never talks to press, but on one wall, there's a framed drawing, a single leaf curling gently at the edges. No caption, because he doesn't need one, and Rafael still walks the same yard, still folds his napkin just so, still murmurs plant names under his breath like prayer. A psychologist brought in to assess his mental state describes him as present but inward-facing, like a dial tuned to a different frequency, one that can't be picked up unless you know the code. And codes are everywhere, in smuggled seeds, in curved rows, in unexpected valleys, in the hum of someone tending to life instead of fleeing from death. At a government hearing, when asked directly if Rafael still poses a threat to public security, one official pauses before answering. Not in the way we measure threat, but something still grows from where he's been. That's the thing about soil. It remembers. It's spring in the Sierra, and the mountain air moves slow, thick with pollen, river mist, and something else. Something older. In the small village of Badiraguato, a boy walks barefoot across a stretch of land his grandfather swears was once watched over by a man with a garden in his soul. The boy doesn't ask who. He just listens to the hush the wind makes between trees. In these parts, the earth doesn't give up its names easily. Back in El Altiplano, the man known as Rafael Caro Quintero turns another page. His books have changed. No longer just agronomy. Now it's philosophy, mathematics, natural systems theory. As if he's no longer studying how to grow things, but how to understand why things grow at all. A visiting chaplain asks if he's found faith during incarceration. "I've always had it," Rafael replies, "just not in men." He stands longer now. His posture has stiffened, but his hands still steady, always folding paper, tracing lines, sketching cycles in the margins of prison documents. One day, a guard notices a strange spiral drawn repeatedly across several sheets, wider at one end, narrowing toward the base. When asked about it, Rafael says, "It's the shape of patience." Outside, the story continues to mutate. Journalists, some old enough to remember the Camarena case firsthand, start asking different questions. Not, where is he now? But, what does he still mean? Because the longer Rafael remains in semi-silence, the more his story detaches from the violence that once surrounded it. What remains is shape, principle, pattern, and patterns persist. In 2026, a new marijuana strain appears quietly on the market. Clean, fragrant, resilient, too refined to be coincidence. Agronomists call it variant RQ17. When asked where it came from, the distributors only smile. Old recipe, new son. Is it his? Hard to say. but it's definitely his style. Meanwhile, in several rural areas across Durango and Sinaloa, community gardens begin operating under the same rules Rafael once set at Rancho Buffalo. Not declared, just evident. Compost first. Shade rotation. Nonverbal cues to minimize movement. Elders teach it. Young people absorb it. No one takes credit. Do you remember the DEA agent who once said, Rafael cultivated an empire like a monk with a machete? That phrase gets reused in a university lecture on asymmetric power, about how some leaders don't need armies when they have timing. Back in the prison, Rafael's letters become fewer. He writes only once every few months now, always in the same handwriting. Measured looping strokes, each word like a seed pressed into soil. One letter, found in an intercepted envelope, reads, "The root, once deep enough, stops needing the surface." By now, even the guards speak about him with a strange mixture of reverence and curiosity. He's not like the others, one says. Doesn't ask for news. Doesn't talk about the outside. He just tends what's his. And what is his? A myth? A movement? A method? One theory suggests Rafael began disseminating agricultural knowledge coded into old folk songs. The songs, passed from grower to grower, contain oddly specific lyrics about soil, sunlight, and water balance. A researcher traces 5 of them back to a single village where Rafael once visited a school and donated science textbooks. Coincidence? Or curriculum? It's not long before a new phrase begins circulating among small cultivators across rural Mexico. Si no es limpio, no es del viejo. If it's not clean, it's not from the old man. Many people still think Rafael planned this, built a knowledge tree instead of a criminal tree, that while others hoarded power, he packaged it, shared it, and buried it where it would survive. So what do you think? Can wisdom be weaponized as legacy? In 2027, a new administration comes into power. Talks of extradition resurface. The U.S. insists. Mexico hesitates. Again. The paperwork is shuffled, delayed, reviewed, quietly forgotten on the edge of a Friday afternoon. When asked whether Rafael poses an immediate threat to American interests, a White House official replies, "No more than a shadow threatens a flame." But shadows don't die. They just change shape. Do you remember the botanist who traveled to the Sierra to study native plant strains and came back with a theory that the mountain climate had been subtly modified? Someone, she said, knew how to reroute a stream without a shovel. One night, a drone picks up an unusual pattern of heat in the northern highlands. Lines, rows, really. Faint, but too regular to be random. Crops, no roads in, no footprints out. Just geometry in the wilderness. And then a fire, controlled, precise. The field gone by morning. The only thing left behind, a stone, carved with 2 petals facing opposite directions, back in El Altiplano. Rafael, whether the real one or the man standing in for him, stirs compost with a worn plastic spoon. A beetle crawls across his wrist. He lets it stay, watches it, then murmurs something the guards don't catch. One swears it was a prayer, another swears it was a recipe. Either way, no one interrupts, because by now, they know what he's doing isn't noise, it's design. Everything he's ever done has been by design. Fog curls through the ravines of northern Sinaloa, like steam rising from an old kettle. And somewhere in that breath of the mountain, an old pattern resurfaces. One Rafael Caro Quintero would recognize instantly. Long, low rows pressed into the hillside at a mathematically perfect angle. Not wide enough for modern machinery. Not chaotic enough for a new grower. Just exact. Intentional. Satellite imagery picks it up during a routine scan in early 2028. The area has been watched before. Decades, in fact. But this time, Something is different. The plants aren't cannabis, not poppies either. They're diversified. Beans, corn, a small section of what appears to be lavender. Mixed planting, an old-school survival strategy, the kind Rafael once practiced in the early years before the money turned loud. But who's planting them? The surveillance team doesn't know. All they catch is a single image. A man leading a mule with a burlap sack and a machete, wearing a faded blue shirt and a straw hat. His face is hidden, turned toward the hills. When the image is shown to former DEA agents, one responds dryly. If that's not him, it's someone who studied under him like scripture. Meanwhile, inside El Altiplano, the man presumed to be Rafael begins speaking again. Not much, not often, but selectively. He offers a quote from Virgil during a check-in with a new psychologist. "Blessed is he who has learned to know the causes of things." Then he returns to his notebook and resumes drawing the cycle of nitrogen absorption in a shaded greenhouse. To the outside world, he's irrelevant, a relic. But inside these walls, something quietly unfurls. There's talk of a program, one Rafael supposedly suggested, teaching sustainable agriculture to young inmates. Nothing formal, just circles in the courtyard, hands in soil, questions asked and answered without hierarchy. One participant says, "He doesn't tell you what to do. He just makes you realize what you were missing." Another says, "It's not farming, it's patience, disguised." The guards let it continue. It causes no harm, and it keeps the younger inmates busy. But outside, the myth continues evolving. The phrase, Escuela del Norte, begins appearing in rural farming collectives. Not a gang, not a cartel, just a name whispered among growers who refuse to sell to traffickers. They claim allegiance not to crime, but to quality. Their motto, if it doesn't feed or heal, it's not worth planting. Local police suspect these groups are fronts, but they find no contraband. Just produce. Sometimes seeds packaged with diagrams. Sometimes tiny booklets with drawings of old irrigation systems. Sometimes letters, unsigned, quoting lessons that sound familiar. Do you remember the old lieutenant who testified during the Camarena investigation, saying Rafael used to end meetings by asking, "What did we learn today?" At the time, it was dismissed as affectation. Now it feels like foreshadowing. Many people still think that the reason Rafael's myth outlasts the others is because he never tried to be feared, just remembered. So what do you think? Is the legacy of a gardener stronger than the footprint of a soldier? In 2028, a researcher from UNAM publishes a study analyzing water conservation methods used in mountainous narco plantations. The paper notes several cases where runoff control and drip efficiency were far beyond what local farmers typically employed. She credits unknown actors with revolutionary field strategy under constraint. In her acknowledgments, she thanks an anonymous mentor who only ever responded to messages by mail. Back in the prison, Rafael sits longer in the afternoon light. A tremor has developed in his left hand. Still, he draws. A new sketch appears in his notebook. An oval, bisected by a wavy line, with root systems mirroring tree branches above. It's labeled La Doble Vida, the double life. At night, guards hear him speaking softly, not to anyone, but to something. Maybe to the plants, maybe to memory. One swears he caught a phrase repeated, "You only bury what you want to return." Outside, a documentary crew visits La Noria, Rafael's birthplace. They find little, a house crumbling under dust, a woman who says she remembers his laugh, a plot of land overgrown, but with mint, lavender, and oregano growing wildly at its center, as if someone planted order, then let it go. In a drawer inside the home, They find a torn page from a 1970s farming manual. It's been marked with underlines and notes. One phrase is circled 4 times. The strength of the crop is determined long before it breaks the surface. No one claims it, but they all know who wrote it. At the same time, a federal committee debates once again whether to honor the U.S. extradition request. One minister argues he's too old. Another says precedent matters. Another simply says, he's not the man he was. When the vote comes, it's delayed. Again, because no one wants to be the one to plant the final nail in a legend that still whispers. Do you remember the teacher from Guadalajara who claimed Rafael once funded her school's roof after a hurricane? When asked if she thought he was dangerous, she replied, yes, but only to those who ruined what they couldn't grow. And perhaps that's the truest summation yet. A danger to chaos, an enemy of waste, a cultivator of control. He didn't raise armies. He raised expectations, and expectations don't die easily. Summer settles over Mexico like a slow exhale. Heat clinging to walls. Time stretching between the chirp of cicadas and the shuffle of tired boots in the dirt. In the hills, fields thrum quietly with growth. And somewhere between Sinaloa and Durango, rumors rise with the dust. It begins with a delivery truck, unremarkable, rusted sides, worn tires, registered to no one of importance. But inside, among crates of beans and cornmeal, a small satchel holds handwritten papers, diagrams of crop rotation cycles, soil charts coded by moon phase, and one envelope containing nothing but a pressed yellow flower. The truck disappears 2 days later. Just gone. No driver found. But the papers make it to a rural farming cooperative in Chihuahua, where a group of young growers call themselves Los Silenciosos. They claim no leader, only a method. They operate with unusual efficiency. No drugs, just crops. No weapons, just hands hardened by purpose. And the name most whispered among them? El Viejo, the old man. Meanwhile, inside El Altiplano, the man wearing Rafael Caro Quintero's name writes fewer notes and begins saying more. But what he says isn't about the past. It's about systems, balance. His cell becomes more than a room. It becomes a lecture hall without an audience. Or so it seems, until one day, an inmate asks if he can help grow tomatoes on the edge of the exercise yard. Rafael nods once and hands him a folded napkin. Written on it are 5 steps, each one so precise it reads like a riddle. The last says, don't touch them for the first 3 mornings. Let them wonder if they're alone. The tomatoes grow well, too well. Word spreads. A quiet mentorship forms. No titles, no ceremony. Just lessons that echo louder than commands ever could. Back outside, an odd report hits an internal DEA channel. A field agent stationed in Baja intercepts a crate labeled pet feed. It contains no drugs, no weapons, just sealed pouches of soil, each labeled with a date, a location, and a small stamped leaf insignia. The soil is analyzed. It shows ideal nutrient content. Balanced pH. Perfect for high resilience crops. There's no record of who shipped it, no company, no route, just silence. And underneath that silence, design. Do you remember the story of the bakery owner in Mazatlan who claimed a stranger once taught her how to grow herbs and coffee tins on her rooftop? When asked why she thought it mattered, she said, because he told me even flavor needs a root. She keeps the tins on her roof to this day. Many people still think Raphael's post-prison years, whether lived inside or out, are less about influence and more about imprint. That his fingerprints aren't on phones or weapons anymore, but in the way people behave when no one's looking. So what do you think? Is a legacy more dangerous when it outlives the man? In 2029, a book is published by an anonymous author in Mexico City. Its title, Cultivo Invisible, Invisible Cultivation. It's not political, not confessional. It reads more like philosophy. Half manual, half prayer. Chapter titles include The Shadow is a Tool, What Water Knows, Disappearance as Discipline, Design for Those Who Cannot Afford Failure. The preface reads, This is not mine. It is borrowed from time. The book sells slowly, but spreads quickly. Copies appear in prison libraries, in schools, in rural community centers. One chapter, translated loosely, ends with the line, A plan that leaves no trace leaves only truth. Back in El Altiplano, Rafael receives a copy of the book. The guard who hands it to him says nothing. Rafael takes it, flips once to the final page, nods, then places it beneath his bed. He never references it again. But when a younger inmate brings him a question about water compression in rocky soil, he answers with a sentence found word for word in Chapter 4. Coincidence? Maybe. A visitor, speaking under condition of anonymity, later recalls seeing Rafael during a routine inspection. He didn't seem like he was waiting to leave. He seemed like he had already left and was just checking to see if the room was still clean. That same month in the Sierra Madre, wild orchids bloom in a pattern not seen in years. A path forms between them. No boots disturb the soil, but the pattern is unmistakable. An old campesino passing through with his mule sees the blossoms and says, he's pruning again. When asked to clarify, he says, Some people plant once and forget, but some, they remember where every root is buried, even in sleep. And that might be the most accurate thing said all year. Because whether behind bars or beyond the tree line, Rafael Caro Quintero is no longer just a man or a fugitive or even a legend. He's become design in absence, a lesson in longevity, a myth you can plant and expect to bloom 2 decades later. The field doesn't forget, and neither do those who learned by watching, not listening. In the soft hills above Los Mochis, there's a plot of land marked only by 4 stones. Nothing grows there. Not yet. But the soil has been turned, and someone left a single seed in the center, wrapped in a torn page from Cultivating Invisible. In the brittle light of early autumn, the Sierra Madre glows a dusty gold, its trees rustling in time with a wind that seems older than sound itself. On a narrow trail barely wide enough for a mule, an older man walks alone, shoulders sloped, boots worn. He carries a small canvas bag across his chest, and though his pace is slow, it's steady, purposeful, unhurried. No one photographs him, no one dares, because in that part of the world, to witness such a figure and say his name out loud is to misunderstand the point entirely. At the same moment, inside El Altiplano, the man in cell 207 stirs his tea with the same spoon he's used for 7 years. He's still called Rafael, still treated like the high-value inmate he is. But now, he's more of a fixture than a threat. The institution has gotten used to his routines, the way he folds his sheets, the precise order of his books, the way he cuts basil leaves with a thread rather than a knife. He reads less now but writes more, short passages, sentences, thoughts. A few have been confiscated and copied by staff. One reads, To rule a field, you must know when to let the weeds win. Another, the soil forgives, but not twice. They're not aphorisms, they're instructions. And for those who know what to look for, they sound eerily familiar to the methods found in Cultivating Invisible. The anonymous book continues to spread. In the southern Yucatan, a group of permaculture activists reference it in their workshops. In Oaxaca, it becomes required reading in a graduate-level agroecology course. The author is never revealed, but speculation remains persistent. One theory claims it was ghostwritten by former cartel associates using his prison notes. Another argues Rafael himself penned it years earlier and left it to be released posthumously. But Rafael is not dead, not officially, not entirely. And outside, more signs point to that lingering truth. A new community garden project begins near San Ignacio, unusual for its funding, which comes in untraceable donations. always in cash, always accompanied by handwritten diagrams on thin, cream-colored paper. The diagrams match sketches recovered from Rafael's old prison notebooks, down to the smudges, the folded edges, the ink type. The garden thrives. It uses no pesticides. The children who tend it hum while they work. In the village of Kosala, an old woman finds a bundle of books at her doorstep. Agricultural manuals, a pair of children's textbooks, and one hand-bound booklet titled simply R. Inside are brief passages, reflections, instructions, and a few poems. One reads, "If you plant in a grave, grow something taller than sorrow." Who wrote it? She doesn't ask. She just places it on her altar. Many people still think the true Rafael Caro Quintero, the man who built Rancho Buffalo with method instead of menace, faded long ago. That what exists now is only residual energy, a name, a ghost in folded paper. So, what do you think? Can legacy be written with roots instead of ink? Meanwhile, in Mexico City, the extradition process stalls again. On record, the delays are bureaucratic. Off record, they're political. Some in power quietly admit they fear what extradition might ignite, not just unrest, but myth collapse. Rafael's name no longer invokes cartel violence. It invokes something harder to control. Respect. Respect from the people who still remember when roads were paved, because he asked, when gardens grew because he stayed. Inside prison he plants less, but others plant for him now. Younger inmates bring him saplings, ask quiet questions, listen to quiet answers. He speaks sparingly, but when he does, his advice always sounds like it's meant for something much larger than a garden. One morning, a new tomato plant appears on the prison's east wall. Not authorized, not claimed, but watered, carefully, every day at the same hour. Back in the hills, a man is seen building a greenhouse using glass scavenged from broken trucks. No one sees his face, but a shopkeeper remembers the calloused hands, the way he asked for soil with more soul and less sand. And in Durango, a stranger shows up to a dying man's ranch and revives a single lemon tree thought to be gone, leaves it blooming and disappears by dawn. No proof, just fruit. That might be the most Raphael-like act of all. Leave no photo, no story, just a quiet correction. Because he never worked in noise. He worked in absence. He never declared control. He demonstrated it through order, through rhythm, through an unshakable belief that what's tended slowly lasts longer than what's built fast. Do you remember the one guard who said, "He never walked fast, but the hallway always seemed shorter when he passed"? They say that about rivers, too. In a windswept field on the edge of Sonora, rows of plants shimmer under moonlight. Not uniform, not mass-produced, but curated. Each row slopes just slightly, following the land's natural curve. A local farmer, passing by on his way home, stops at the edge of the clearing. He doesn't enter, just removes his hat and bows his head. He's not superstitious. But some rows aren't meant to be walked without invitation. That field wasn't there last season, and no one claims it. No fences, no guards, no signs, but the weeds are missing, which means someone still tends it. Back in El Altiplano, the man known as Rafael Caro Quintero is reviewing a shipment of seeds provided through a rare educational grant. He's taken to mentoring 2 inmates under the guise of agricultural training. Their crime history is irrelevant to him. What matters is how they listen and how they handle silence. You don't start with the seeds, he tells them. You start with the shadows. When asked what that means, he doesn't explain, because explanation is for those who haven't learned to observe. Meanwhile, outside, the shadow grows. In Culiacan, a radio host receives an anonymous envelope. Inside, a flash drive, a single page with handwritten notes, and a sprig of dried oregano. The drive contains audio, recordings of lessons in Spanish spoken in a low, steady voice. Not sermons, not threats. Lessons on water timing, on pest behavior, on letting the plants decide when they're done. The audio is released under the title Lecciones del Viejo. It's passed like a secret, burned to CDs, whispered between school teachers, played low in bars after hours. One day, someone overlays music behind it. The track goes viral in a small but devoted corner of Mexico's underground cultural scene. Rafael's voice, if it is Rafael, is now a lullaby for growers, thinkers, exiles, and yet the man in the cell says nothing, just listens when others speak of it. Then quietly, almost as an afterthought, changes the position of one basil plant on his windowsill by half an inch. That evening it blooms. Coincidence? Possibly. Or possibly, Rafael just knows how to listen. A DEA report in early 2030 details several grow operations raided in Sonora. They find no drugs, only vegetables, medicinal herbs. In one case, a prototype for a seed drying system that uses passive solar angles not found in any commercial blueprint. Buried under one of the systems is a sealed tin box. Inside, a journal. Its pages are faded, water-stained, but legible. It contains formulas, soil diagrams, the occasional quote like, "If you plant too fast, the plant will think the world is rushing." And at the bottom of the final page, 3 words. "Leave no weeds." No signature, but it doesn't need one. Do you remember the retired trafficker who, in a rare interview, said, "We all wanted to be Gallardo, Guzman, all of them. But Rafael, we wanted to be remembered by Rafael." That tells you everything, because in this world, fear fades. Memory stays. And Rafael's memory has taken root far outside prison walls. It's not just in the books. It's in habits, in posture, in how someone places a watering can at the exact same angle every morning, even if no one's watching. A sociologist in Mexico City writes a paper titled Power in the Absence, the Caro Quintero Paradigm. In it, she proposes that Rafael's most influential years may be post-operational, that his absence has created a framework of reverence, turning him from criminal to cipher. The prison doesn't comment, but the guards keep watching his courtyard garden. Nothing illegal grows there, but it grows better than any other plot in the entire facility. One guard starts sneaking out tomato seeds to send home to her mother's small farm. She doesn't think of it as theft. She thinks of it as sharing method. That's the word she uses, because that's what Rafael left behind. Not blueprints, not contraband. Method, a way of seeing, a way of tending. Many people still think his story ended with his second arrest, but others, quietly, almost in reverence, believe the second act only began then. So what do you think? Can a man outlive his own body simply by cultivating discipline in others? In Michoacan, a young botanist hosts a podcast discussing forgotten agricultural systems. One episode is dedicated entirely to the Caro method. He says it's not about plants at all. It's about how you move through a space without being louder than the wind. Back at El Altiplano, the man wakes each morning at the same time, brushes his hair, boils tea, touches each leaf of his garden with one hand, then stands for exactly 1 minute with his eyes closed. When asked by an inmate what he's doing, he says, thanking what won't speak back. That night, he writes a single sentence in his notebook. A seed isn't grateful, but it remembers. The notebook is filed away. The light dims, and in a valley not far from Durango, a tomato plant blooms 2 weeks early. In the canyons north of Tamazula, where the wind carries stories faster than cars, a woman tending goats hears something unusual at dawn. A series of knocks, evenly spaced, coming from the far side of her storage shed. She finds nothing but a burlap pouch hung from a nail. Inside, seed packets, a folded map drawn by hand, and a weather-stained note that reads, "Move the rose 4 degrees west. Let the hill decide the shade." She says nothing to the authorities, because who would she even call? Back in El Altiplano, the man behind bars, still listed in federal records as Rafael Caro Quintero, sits through another round of medical examinations. His health continues to decline, blood pressure rising, kidney strain worsening, eyesight fading slightly. But when asked if he needs anything, he requests only a single bulb of garlic with roots intact. The nurse thinks he's joking. He isn't. The guards begin to speak of him now like a fixture. Not in mockery, never that. With caution, with terms usually reserved for old, indelible trees. He won't budge, one says, but he listens like a mirror. The prison assigns a new psychology intern to his wing, young, curious. She arrives with notepads and expectations. After their first session, she writes in her report, "Inmate presents with calm affect and coherent speech, refuses to speak about past criminal acts, deflects questions toward agriculture, soil erosion, and climate patterns, may be dissociating or designing something." When she asks him if he feels remorse for his past, he says, "Remorse is like salt. Too little, and nothing heals. Too much, and nothing grows." Outside the prison, a new initiative arises in Guerrero. Urban rooftops converted into small greenhouses. The layout is suspiciously uniform, efficient. The NGO behind it claims no affiliation with narcotics, but in every blueprint, a curious stamp appears in the corner. A spiral of roots around a silent orchid. Back in Sinaloa, a group of retired men gather weekly at a local cafe. They speak little, sip slowly. Their only tradition is placing a single folded napkin on the table's edge before they leave. Inside each napkin, a seed. No one picks them up. They're not meant to be found. They're meant to be absorbed. Many people still think that even if Rafael isn't alive, whether the man in prison is him or not, his philosophy has rooted itself in a way no empire of concrete ever could. So what do you think? Is immortality just repetition with reverence? A government task force tasked with tracing narco-trafficking's evolution over the past 50 years finds something peculiar in their final draft, while other figures left chaos in their wake. Mass graves, turf wars, digital footprints. Rafael left patterns, reclaimed farmland, restoration techniques, clean rivers, libraries in rural towns. An advisor writes in the margins of the report, did he leave power or did he bury it? The question is never answered. In El Altiplano, Rafael starts keeping stones, small ones, smooth, each labeled with a date. When asked why, he simply replies, to remember the weight of small things. One stone disappears, another is added. He gives one to a young inmate on the day of that boy's release. No words, just the stone. Months later, that same inmate is seen starting a small teaching plot behind a community center in Zacatecas. He says nothing, but he waters with care. Do you remember the journalist who snuck a question into a press conference in 2029, asking the president if the government believes the real Rafael was captured in 2022? The president paused, smiled faintly, then answered, "The real ones are always harder to catch than their bodies." The press laughed, but the moment landed heavy. In the hills, whispers shift tone. Less awe, more instruction. Stories turn into rituals. Fields planted with a pause between every fifth seed. Fertilizer buried a finger deeper than normal. Even how water is poured. Tilted, not splashed. These are not coincidences. They are signatures, and all of them trace back to him, or the idea of him. In one village, a boy carves a figure into a wooden post. Simple, almost childlike. A man with a wide hat and a vine for a beard. He leaves it near the edge of the forest, facing east. Locals begin leaving offerings: beans, soil, tiny folded notes with planting questions. Sometimes the notes return, answered. The handwriting always the same: tight script, calm curves, margins precise. It's 2031 now. In the desert outside Hermosillo, wind patterns shift just slightly, enough to stir the dust in long, even lines. From above, those lines form a grid, unbroken and perfect, like something drawn by a compass too patient for human hands. A drone passes overhead, records the layout. Analysts label it. Unidentified subsistence field, no criminal association. But one agronomist, reviewing the footage, leans in and whispers, "That's not new." And she's right. It's a restoration, a map of growth returned to old Earth. Inside El Altiplano, Rafael's body begins to slow. His appetite fades. His walks shorten. His pulse beats stubborn but tired. And yet, each morning, the first thing he does is turn toward the sun and stand for one breath longer than necessary. Some guards think it's a ritual. Others think he's checking the angle of the light. He tells no one, but a notebook page later appears with the line, "The body weakens when it loses reason, so give it rhythm instead." He begins giving away more of his notes, not directly. They appear tucked under trays, slipped between pages in the prison library. One inmate finds a set of sketches detailing how to plant lettuce inside a hollowed-out plastic bottle. Another finds an essay titled, "Yield Through Yielding." They copy them, share them, protect them. No one tells the administration, because in here, knowledge is the only thing still breathing. Meanwhile, Cultivo Invisible gets its first academic translation into English. The foreword is written by a Harvard ecologist who claims the book reshaped her understanding of regenerative farming. She calls the author a philosopher of silence. And while she avoids saying Rafael's name directly, she references a life forged in pressure and made meaningful in shadow. The book becomes a quiet cult classic among environmental circles, but the press stays away because there's no clean headline for a narco-turned-mystic horticulturist. Still, more signs emerge. In northern Jalisco, an elementary school installs a vertical garden system with an origin story so strange no one questions it. Anonymous blueprints, hand-labeled parts, a short instruction sheet that ends with, "Let the children tend it. Only them." It thrives. Back in El Altiplano, a new warden arrives. Young by the system standards, efficient, analytical. On his third day, he visits Rafael's cell. The two men speak for exactly 4 minutes. No one hears what is said. But afterward, Rafael's garden is expanded by 1/2 meter, and a second compost bin appears. Officially, it's labeled as rehabilitation incentive. Unofficially, it's considered untouchable. Do you remember the field agent stationed in Sinaloa who, in his retirement memoir, admitted that even during their biggest operations, they never really found Rafael? They just chased versions of him? He wrote, "Some men vanish by accident. Others vanish by design. Rafael, he vanished into instruction. And perhaps that's the point. Not erasure, diffusion. Rafael's name shows up less and less now in media, but the methods? Ubiquitous. Soil layering patterns traced back to his early blueprints. Unorthodox water harvesting systems labeled in prison sketches. Even a quiet resurgence in heirloom seed banks, with donation boxes marked only with an R and a spiral. Many people still think his death, if it happens, will be unnoticed. Unrecorded. Not from malice, but from precision. That he will choose the moment. Vanish not in fire or chaos, but in rhythm. So what do you think? Is it possible to die and still grow in every corner of a land that once hunted you? Is the man in cell 207 still the same man, or has he already passed, leaving behind only someone to water the myth? In Oaxaca, a stone circle appears near an old aqueduct, each rock marked with a different crop name: corn, beans, squash, mint, and at the center, an unlit candle, surrounded by soil. Locals don't touch it. They plant around it instead. Back in the prison, Rafael stops writing. Not dramatically, just gently. The guards don't notice at first, but the inmates do. One offers him a new pen. He declines with a smile, then gives that inmate his last notebook. Its final page is blank, except for a single line at the bottom. Everything I didn't write, I left in the ground. The rains come late in 2031. Clouds linger over the Sierra Madre, hesitant, heavy. But when they do break, it's not violent, just patient. The kind of rain that doesn't wash things away, but returns them. Seeds buried too deep begin to stir. Dry earth splits open like a whisper, and in small patches of forgotten land, green breaks through. Some call it a coincidence, others call it timing. But in a tiny village south of Schwa, elders gather at dawn beside a newly sprouted patch of maize. No one planted it, not officially. Yet it rises in a perfect semicircle, its rows tilted 5 degrees toward the sunrise, and in the center of the arc, a stone, flat, dark, etched with a spiral. They don't move it. They just let it sit there. In El Altiplano, Rafael's body has grown noticeably frail. His movements slower, his shoulders more drawn inward, but his eyes remain sharp, watchful, observing more than speaking. He eats less now, sleeps more, but every morning he still visits the basil and touches each leaf with the back of his hand as if saying, "I remember you." A nurse catches him humming once, just once, an old song, a lullaby from the Sinaloan countryside, rarely heard now. She doesn't recognize the words, but she writes them down. Later, a local archivist confirms. It's a harvest song, nearly extinct, meant to be sung by farmers while turning over the first inch of soil in spring. That afternoon, Rafael collapses in the courtyard. He's helped back to his cell. No emergency is declared, but word travels fast. The younger inmates sit quiet that evening. One of them lights a match and lets it burn until the flame kisses his fingers. Not in pain, in rhythm. Then he scratches a spiral into his cell wall with a spoon handle and doesn't say a word. The next day, Rafael doesn't come out. His garden is watered by someone else. A junior guard, hardly older than 20, takes it upon herself. Not instructed, not ordered, just moved to act. She's seen the way he looked at the soil, and now it's looking back. Later that week, the prison warden files an unusual request to transfer some of Rafael's personal notebooks to the National Archives. The request is denied. Instead, they are stored in a sealed cabinet, not for security, for reference. Back in the outside world, in a town near Tepic, a community center opens its doors to a new after-school program. They teach sustainable agriculture to kids aged 10 and under. The syllabus includes hands-on growing, water timing, and lunar planting cycles. At the bottom of each printed lesson is a small symbol, a single sprouting seed under a crescent moon. No one claims authorship. No one needs to. Many people still think the final disappearance of Rafael Caro Quintero, whether through death or choice, won't be marked by headlines or ceremonies. It will be seen in the behavior of those who stopped asking who planted the first seed and simply continued the row. So what do you think? Is death the last step, or just the moment you step aside and let others walk your rhythm? In a remote stretch of Chihuahua, 2 teenagers find an old man's hat caught on a fence post. Inside it is a note, scrawled in shaking script. The field is ready. Let it belong to no one. That evening, they return with hose and buckets. No one asks why. In prison, Rafael's breath becomes quieter, not labored, just less, as if being returned to the same silence he once carved paths through. He doesn't speak in his final moments, not because he cannot, but because there's nothing new to say. Everything he believed is already out there, in courtyards, in soil, in patterns remembered but never claimed. And when the official notice finally comes, a quiet death, no media allowed, El Altiplano observes a strange stillness for 24 hours. Inmates don't shout. Guards walk softer. Someone leaves a sprig of rosemary near his door. Not taken, not moved, just left. A week later, a shipment of compost arrives at a rural school in Nayarit. Included in the crate, a handwritten card that reads, "Don't teach them to grow food, teach them to wait for it. No sender. No return address," but the handwriting is unmistakable. Long after the gates of El Altiplano have locked for the night, and the corridors fall to their quiet breathing, a janitor finds something tucked beneath a loose tile in the east corridor. A folded cloth. Inside it, a flat piece of wood, sanded smooth, with just one word carved carefully into the grain. Cultivar. To cultivate. He doesn't report it. Instead, he wraps it again and places it on a shelf beside the mop bucket. Out in the world, stories begin to decelerate, not because they've ended, but because they've woven into routine. In Durango, a prison garden expands by 6 plots. No press, just soil and schedule. In Sinaloa, a boy who once struggled to read now co-manages a greenhouse at his elementary school. He waters the roots at sunrise before the plants can hear the world waking up. In Los Mochis, an elderly woman keeps a ledger of dreams she's had about her brother, the one who vanished after his last cartel run. In every dream, he's in a field, smiling, not running. She believes someone like Rafael gave him that peace. She doesn't say this aloud, but she keeps a single leaf pressed between 2 photographs in her kitchen drawer. The leaf has no label, but the veins are etched like rivers drawn from memory. Meanwhile, Cultivo Invisible is quietly adopted into a South American pilot program on ecological rehabilitation. Its pages, still officially unauthored, become the basis for soil renewal along flood-prone hillsides. No one prints new copies anymore. They handwrite the methods, memorize them, pass them like recipes, and in every iteration, the structure stays the same. Observation first, planting second, words last. Many people still think a legacy is a shape carved in stone, but more and more are beginning to believe it's a rhythm laid gently in soil. So what do you think? Is the mark of a man found in what he claimed or in what he gave away? Back in El Altiplano, Rafael's cell is cleared. Quietly, respectfully, the basil plant is left outside his window. No one moves it, but months later, a new sprout appears beside it, unplanted, unintended. The same variety. Stronger. The guards nickname it El Segundo and leave it alone. Elsewhere, the prison chapel adds a bench under the east window. An inmate sits there every morning now, eyes closed, holding a stone in his palm. No one asks why, but the silence around him feels different, like something remembered rather than missing. In an alley behind a small cantina in Culiacan, a mural is painted in 3 shades of green. No faces, no names. Just a spiral pattern of roots ending in a bloom. No signature. A schoolteacher passes by on her way home and smiles. She tells her daughter, someone is still tending things. In the mountains, a boy hears an old tale about a narco who walked into the earth and left behind a map only farmers could read. He doesn't believe it. Not yet. But when he plants his first corn, he does it facing east. just in case. Back at the archive facility in Mexico City, a clerk opens a sealed package sent from a now defunct prison return address. Inside, a thin notebook. No author listed. Its title is handwritten in the corner, Inheritance Without Ownership. The pages are nearly blank, except for 3 diagrams. And at the end, one line, like a bow tied around the myth. The best legacy is the one they think they built themselves. The package is never officially filed, but a copy of the diagrams circulates in a WhatsApp group of agricultural students within days. And one of them, a young woman from Sonora, adds a final, quiet annotation in her own handwriting beneath the 3rd diagram. Gracias, viejo. She closes her notebook and gets to work. And now, as we leave behind the last footprints in Rafael's long corridor of shadows, let's slow our pace, soften the light, and let the quiet wrap gently around us. Imagine that field again, the one just beyond the reach of roads, the one tended not with noise, but with repetition. There's no nameplate, no fences, just rhythm. Soil turned by hands that ask for nothing but time. The wind moves low across it now, not speaking, just brushing gently over new leaves and half-formed thoughts. Somewhere, a child waters a sprout without asking why it grows that way. Somewhere else, an elder adjusts the slope of a furrow by instinct, not instruction. These things don't make headlines, but they carry weight. And in the hush between each gesture, Rafael lingers, not as a man anymore, but as design, as quiet, as cadence in the act of care. The world will forget some names. That's the nature of time. But what it doesn't forget are the things that change its rhythm. And Rafael, whether you see him as saint or sinner, understood one thing with absolute clarity. Some empires are built with concrete, others with patience. So tonight, let the wind settle, let the lights dim, and if you find yourself thinking of him again someday, when planting or watching a quiet corner bloom without fanfare, smile gently and know you've stepped right into the legacy he left. Now rest easy wherever you are. The garden is growing and the silence is full.